For the record, my name is Sharon Durkin, City Councilor for District 8, and I'm the chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation. Today is March 31st, 2025. It is 2:05, and this hearing is being recorded. It is also being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, FiOS Channel 964. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.plandev@boston.gov and will be made part of the public record and available to all councilors. Public testimony will be taken at the end of this hearing. Individuals will be called on in the order in which they've signed up to testify and will have 2 minutes to testify. If you are interested in testifying in person, please add your name to the sign-up sheet virtually near the entrance of the chamber. If you are looking to testify virtually, please email our central staff liaison, Shane Pack, at shane.pac@boston.gov for the link, and your name will be added to the list. Thanks for all you do, Shane. Today's hearing is on docket 0311, order for a hearing to address the displacement of Bostonians as a result of new and future development. This matter was sponsored by Councilors Enrique Pepin, Julia Mejia, and Brian Worrell, and was referred to the committee on May 11th, 2025. Today, I am joined by my colleagues in order of arrival. Councilor Pepin, our lead sponsor, Councilor Murphy, Councilor Flynn. Oh, sorry, I think this is out of order. Oh, you are, okay. Councilor Murphy, Councilor Flynn, and Councilor Fitzgerald. Okay. As mentioned, before today's docket seeks to discuss a new topic of displacement of Bostonians as a result of new and future development. I want to thank Councilor Pepin and the co-sponsors for bringing this forward and for recognizing that development in our city must go hand in hand with thoughtful, equitable planning. Displacement is a deeply complex issue, so I'd like to turn this over to the panelists just to briefly say your name and your position, starting with Chief Sheila Dillon.
Good afternoon, Sheila Dillon, Chief of Housing for the City of Boston and the Director of the Mayor's Office of Housing.
Hello, Catherine Lusk, Executive Director of the Planning Advisory Council.
Good afternoon, I'm Devin Quirk, Deputy Chief of the Planning Department.
Shagun Idawu, for the last 1,183 days, serving as the Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion.
Thank you. We all need a clock like that. So I guess we'll go to my colleagues in order of arrival for opening statements, starting with the lead sponsor, Councilor Pepin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the panelists for being here today on this very important topic. Before I begin, I just want to wish a very happy birthday to my daughter. So I just wanted to say happy birthday, Penelope. So as a city councilor for District 5 for the past year and a few months, I've had the privilege of actively working on the rezoning of multiple of my neighborhoods and, through the process of squares and streets. A lot of that has brought up a lot of concerns about what does this mean for the future of tenants, landlords, homeowners, business owners in my district. So this topic is very near and dear not only to me, but to the residents in my district. This has been probably the number one topic at my desk. Rightfully so, because as we know, prices in Boston have skyrocketed throughout the years. Families are moving out of Boston, prices of rent are increasing, the prices of homes are increasing, and business owners are looking for ways to stay here in Boston. Hence why I wanted to be the lead sponsor of this hearing, specifically to learn about what strategies the administration is working on to make sure that we are protecting our existing residents and business owners in the city of Boston. I was very pleased to get the news at the State of the City that you came up with an amazing and very thorough anti-displacement strategy toolkit. My team did some research. This is probably a very unique one compared to other municipalities in the country. We couldn't find something that emulated that, in that way. So I'm very curious to see how we are planning to implement that going forward, especially as programs like Squares and Streets happen in my district and across the city. I'm very curious to see the relationship between the planning department, the Office of Housing, and the Economic Inclusion and Opportunity Cabinet. Sorry, Chief. So I want to make sure that we're on the same page here to make sure that we are protecting our residents. Thank you, Madam Chair, for hosting this hearing. I look forward to asking my questions.
Thank you so much, Councilor Pepin. Councilor Murphy?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the lead sponsor for filing this. And does Penny Pepin have a middle name that begins with P?
P. Penelope.
Penny, Penelope, that's good, okay, just checking. And then I have to ask, do you count every day? Because as a kindergarten teacher, we would always know exactly what day we're on and how many days were left to get to 180, but, okay, just, or is there another reason why you knew that? Okay, just checking.
Well, I figure it's better to count up than count down.
Okay.
Counselor, yeah.
That's good. This is, like you said, Council Pepin, something I know we all spend a lot of time with our constituents, but for me, and I think I can speak for all of us, for us as residents of the city of Boston also, multi-generational with my kids who are having kids, and my mom, and 91-year-old dad, like all these different, so it's not just our seniors, which I know we focus a lot on making sure that we're not displacing our seniors, it's our business owners with our plans, and this conversation, making sure we're always thinking about any unintended consequences when we have good ideas and then maybe didn't realize that it may have a different negative effect. So it's important that we're all here together. And I'm going to listen closely, but my assumption is that you're all ready, with this toolbox we're talking about. But I hope from this conversation that I'll be able to feel confident that we really are working together and we have plans, right? Not just buzzwords, to make sure that, our residents, business owners, visitors know that we're valuing, right, the generations. And, if you've been here for 1 week or 5 generations, like how are we making sure that you feel that we care, that you're welcome, and that we want you to stay, and that it's not displacement, that our policies that are forcing people to be displaced is important, a conversation we should have. So looking forward to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the administration team that's here. My district, District 2, includes maybe one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in New England, which is the South Boston waterfront area, and also maybe one of the lowest income areas in the city, which is Chinatown. I spend a lot of my time in Chinatown advocating and fighting for my residents, and many of them just simply don't have the financial means to pay these huge rents that are taking place, and work with Sheila on many of these issues. I want to acknowledge your leadership, Sheila, in helping me for the last 7 years supporting residents of Chinatown. So that's where I'm at. I want to know what type of programs there are to support my constituents, especially low-income residents. That's important to me. And then the other issue I had that I'd like to highlight is I just came back from a lunch at St. Anthony's Shrine, and they have a monthly lunch for homeless veterans. And a lot of them were living at the New England Center for Veterans, and a lot of them are working, and they're making some money. They're in recovery. They're in job training programs too. But they're asking me, is there a place in Boston any longer for veterans, homeless veterans? There were a lot of women veterans, Sheila, as we discussed as well. The highest percentage of homeless veterans in the country is women veterans. So that's another question I want to ask, is there an opportunity for women veterans? Many of them might be homeless, but is there an opportunity for them to call Boston home as well? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Fitzgerald?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, administration, for being here today. Look forward to the questions and answers, but let's get right to it. Let's be honest. We're good.
Thank you.
It's an important subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzgerald. So I know that the administration has something that they want to present, and then after that, we'll go to councillors' questions.
Can you pull up great, thank you. I did not think to wear my glasses today, but thankfully I have a hard copy in front of me. It's a pleasure to be with you all. Thank you so much, councilors, for the opportunity to address this issue and share with you the status of the work. As I said before, my name is Catherine Lusk. I serve as Executive Director of the Planning Advisory Council. For folks who aren't familiar with the work of the PAC, we are actually a 9-member internal body comprising Mayor Wu's Built Environment Cabinet. As a cross-departmental effort that required significant collaboration, the PAC spearheaded development of the City of Boston's first citywide anti-displacement action plan. The Planning Department, the Mayor's Office of Housing, the Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion, the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture, Worker Empowerment, and Environment, Energy, and Open Space, and many others came together to produce this plan. I want to share my gratitude with the cabinet chiefs, the department directors and their staff, and the community members that have shaped this important effort, certainly in recent months, but also, frankly, over multiple years. For many years, the residents of Boston have shared concerns over historic displacement, as well as the risk of future displacement. They worry for themselves, their neighbors, and their beloved neighborhood small businesses. They worry that their children will not be able to stay and root here. Historically, housing policies, economic systems, and growth have not served communities equitably, with neighborhoods of color experiencing disproportionate risk and reality of displacement. In response to these concerns and constituent needs, the city has added many tools to its stabilization toolbox over the years, from launching an Office of Housing Stability to creating new financial supports for displaced or at-risk small businesses and arts organizations, to investing directly in housing supply. Neighborhood organizations, CDCs, and residents have also created their own solutions, such as community land trusts, homebuyer programs, and mutual aid organizations. And together with developers, we've worked to foster good growth. Good growth means creating more homes for people of all incomes. It means anchoring beloved small businesses in new buildings and offering needed neighborhood amenities like grocery stores and child care centers. However, addressing displacement in a lasting way requires an even more comprehensive and coordinated approach. So, in response to extensive community feedback, a cross-departmental team has been working over the past year to develop the city's first plan to confront residential, small business, and cultural displacement. The plan, which we released on March 19th, is specifically focused on addressing gaps in our toolbox, though it also lays out all the actions in one place that the city takes to protect people, preserve homes and communities, produce more housing and quality commercial spaces, and help our residents and business owners prosper. I'm going to take you through a few slides just on the action plan, and then, of course, we welcome your questions to dig into the details. So as I shared, this cross-departmental team undertook the work to develop our action plan. It spans 6 cabinets and, frankly, more than 20 departments. Through this effort, we have been, Through this effort, we've been specifically focused on mitigating residential, commercial, and cultural displacement, raising awareness of the many tools the city deploys already, addressing gaps in our existing toolkit, integrating changes wherever possible as part of other evolving processes, including Article 80 modernization, anchoring our efforts to stabilize people and neighborhoods alongside our work to foster good growth and address climate, and specifically, and you'll hear this multiple times today, I'm sure, prioritizing actions within our control, particularly in this moment. We often like to, when we talk about displacement, we often like to just sort of have a common understanding of what we mean when we say displacement. Generally, displacement refers to when people are forced to leave their homes and neighborhoods due to external pressures, but there are different kinds of displacement. Direct displacement refers to when households are forced to move, often due to an acute crisis like an eviction or foreclosure. Economic, also known as indirect displacement, refers to when current residents of an area can no longer afford to live there. We hear, and you hear certainly a lot about this in Boston. The closure or relocation of a business or cultural enterprise can also be impacted or associated with either direct or economic displacement. And importantly, when the nature of goods or services in a given area shifts, residents themselves, and we've heard a lot of this, can feel a sense of loss of identity or dislocation or peripheralization, sort of detachment from the place they've called home.
I would just say for this slide, it's got a little bit too much text, so.
It's wrong on mine.
So hopefully everyone has this in front of them. Okay.
Okay. And happy to bring additional copies down if folks don't have a copy handy. Okay. then finally, gentrification describes a pattern of neighborhood change, often where investment contributes to the displacement of low-income residents. Importantly, while gentrification can lead to displacement, not all displacement is linked to gentrification. So we actually understand now that most direct displacement, particularly evictions, occurs in low-income neighborhoods that are not gentrifying. The action plan is working to address both acute challenges, including some of those we talked about, as well as price pressures. Fewer words on this one, Madam Chair. The plan, we wanted to just give a quick recap on the stages of the process that helped us arrive at a plan. So the action plan itself was released on March 19th, less than a couple weeks ago, for a 45-day public comment period. But important foundational work preceded it. So in December, we released 2 reports as a result of our discovery phase. The first was a comprehensive understanding of community priorities. So it was an in-depth analysis representing constituent concerns and priorities that had been shared with the City of Boston over the prior 2 years. In total, we analyzed more than 1,400 pages of letters, surveys, workshops, comment periods, a wide range representing more than 2,300 Bostonians, and shared that back in the context of that community priorities report, to share back with the public what we had in fact already heard from them. The second report was an existing toolkit and progress report. This was the gap analysis. This is where we, for the first time ever, said, what are all the things that the city does today to mitigate displacement, and how are those tools working? That was one of the multiple inputs into the action plan, to say, what are we doing? What could we be doing better? And what do other cities do that we may want to bring to bear in the City of Boston? Those were both inputs into the action plan. So that was released in March. It specifically focuses on new or recommended improvements to our toolkit, again, to mitigate residential, commercial, and cultural displacement. Alongside that, we released Boston's first ever residential displacement risk map. It's a new tool that we haven't had available before to understand at the census block group level, meaning the sub-neighborhood level at a fine scale, the risk that residents face of displacement. We detail in the action plan a number of ways that we plan to use it, including a number of priority uses we've heard from community already. We anticipate the action plan will be rolled out over 2 years, and in the detail that we provide publicly, we also say, essentially, where are we in implementing? Are we in the early stages in some of these tools, or are we on the late stages, the final step to get them over the finish line? And throughout and alongside all of this work, as you might imagine, we've absolutely been listening to community, doing workshops, surveys, listening as part of major planning initiatives, and we're currently seeking public comment to ensure that the final plan recommends the interests and priorities of the city. I'm not going to try to read some of these next slides, which the councilors will see. For those who have copies in front of them, have a lot of detail. What we wanted to share with you was the overall framework for how the City of Boston is working to respond to our constituents' concerns. So we use a commonly used framework you'll see in a lot of cities' anti-displacement plans called the 3 or 4 Ps. So we are working to protect residents, renters, and low-income homeowners from displacement. That means providing direct services to folks who are facing an acute need or crisis. We are also working on physical spaces. That means the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing, investing in our public housing, and it means critically we have to also be producing more housing. We can't status quo our way out of the crisis. We do have to be building more housing for people of all incomes in all areas of the city. And finally, it's not enough for people to survive. We want to help them thrive. So we, of course, are focused on resident prosperity. How are we giving folks access to home ownership, workforce development, and financial empowerment? We use the same framework in thinking about how we stabilize small businesses and small cultural operators. Again, wanting to protect our anchor small businesses and cultural enterprises, those beloved institutions that are already in our neighborhoods, preserving physical spaces and places, producing more affordable and market rate commercial cultural spaces in priority areas, and then finally, of course, building wealth through ownership and contracting opportunities. What you see on the next two slides are a high-level understanding that there is no one tool or lever that can actually address displacement. It requires a comprehensive and coordinated approach. So within each of these overall goals, there's a number of strategies that the city employs, and then even a level deeper, there's specific tools, programs, initiatives, and staff that help us deliver on those strategies. And you'll see the same for our commercial and cultural stability efforts. And then finally, I just want to close before we open it up for questions by saying we're not done. We recognize we're not done. We have tried to move with the urgency that we know our constituents feel, but we have worked very hard. I think at this point, over 100 staff have been involved, and there is as much investment from the staff as we hear from the community to put forward a comprehensive plan. It is now publicly available for public comment. It's being shared in partnership with wide-ranging departments, and additional listening sessions are being scheduled now. There's an online survey, a dedicated email. But importantly, the plan also lays specific recommendations for implementation. So we call for a one-year review to make sure that we are remaining on target and we're moving at the pace we need to be. And there's specific proposals to support continual engagement, education, and importantly, improve access to our existing services. One of the things we've learned along the way is that there is a lot we do now, and we have an obligation and an opportunity to make sure that constituents know the wealth of resources that are already available to them and get access as swiftly as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'd like to announce we've been joined by Councilors Rorel, Weber, and Coletta Zapata. Before we get started with questions, I want to go to the lead sponsor and let him ask his questions first.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, and I did want to just tell you all, I'm getting copies for everyone of the actual action plan, so I know those are coming to you soon, so thank you.
Again, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panelists for that presentation. Again, I'll just state my appreciation for you all for putting that together. I know that my residents, but I do want to give a shout out to they're in the room. We have Ken, Scott, Marlon, and Lori in the room. Thank you for being here, proudly representing District 5. As I know, this is something that we've been going at it since I got into office, so I appreciate you guys being here. But I like to work in scenarios, right? This is brilliant, but it's big. You know, it's big, and if you are a tenant and you're struggling to pay rent, you may not have the opportunity to take a look at this. So my first questions are going to be about scenarios. If I live in a neighborhood, let's say I live in Roslindale, where the rents are starting to go up, whether they are new, shinier buildings, or just as a result of rising rents, what protects me from a spike in rent increase? And I'm going to add one more question to that: is if I own a small store or small business in a neighborhood, Roslindale Square, Cleary Square, that is being rapidly developed, what tools exist to protect my business? Those two, I'm going to start with those two. I'm going to let you guys answer, and then I have other questions too.
So I can certainly start on the residential scenario that you've outlined, which is one that we see throughout the city. And unfortunately, because rent stabilization didn't pass at the State House, even though Mayor Wu very courageously filed that legislation, we don't have any rent stabilization or rent control in the city, unlike other cities. However, that doesn't mean that there's not things that we can certainly do. So residents that are facing rent increases, first and foremost, need protections, legal protections, and they can certainly call the Office of Housing Stability, and this council body, especially Councilor Weber, was instrumental in getting additional resources for legal representation. So they should be represented in court, represented, or even prior to that, represented talking to their landlord and seeing if something can be worked out that's beneficial for both. If it's clear that a family or a senior, which is the cases that we get, cannot, they won't be able to stay, then they have to have the amount of time they need to find something else. And we do build a lot of affordable housing. One thing that the plan does highlight, and one thing that I think I'm very excited about, is new housing that's coming out, new affordable housing, income-restricted housing that's that's being built and made available. We're going to be setting aside we're going to be setting aside some of those units for families and seniors that are find themselves income burdened. And we've never had this before, and really that came out of conversations with the public. Like, how do they access in a more intentional way new housing, especially housing that's close to where they are now and close to their schools?
And how do you find those families?
What's that?
How do you find those families that are income burdened?
So when that would be part of our interview process, right? So it's like, let's provide you mediation or legal representation now. Let's work with you. And sometimes we pick up the phone and try to work out something with the landlord. But then in the long run, if that's not going to work, we need to get you into a home that you can afford. And so part of it's housing search. And we do a lot of housing search internally and both with our housing partners. But we're also going to make these changes in our lottery preferences, not providing 100% of the lottery units, but a goodly percentage, making them available to people that find themselves at risk.
Okay. And obviously, we had a great example in Mattapan with the Fairlawn Apartments.
Oh,
That
yes.
which is probably something that doesn't happen as often, but should happen more often.
Well, I think you're raising a good question, or a good point. When we can actually take units, existing units, out of the speculative market and get them into nonprofit hands or get them into a for-profit that's willing to take on the deed restrictions, that's a win-win. We end up with new affordable housing and we end up with tenants that are stabilized. And that was wonderful.
Okay. Thank you.
It's not magic. Someone has to run it.
Oh, there
Okay.
we go. There we go. I thought it was all magic. But Councilor, thank you. Thank you for highlighting the question, how do we find these people? And I think maybe as I answer that, one thing to say at the beginning is this is the first time we've had a comprehensive anti-displacement plan for the city of Boston, so this is evolving work, and I want to thank Catherine for her leadership in bringing this all together and for everyone's support in getting us here, and we'll be evolving from here. But one of the things, the action plan looks forward to things that we want to produce. The toolkit looks backwards to things we already have. One of the really important things we want to introduce as part of our Article 80 reform efforts is answering precisely that question, finding the tenants, whether they be commercial or residential, that are at risk of being displaced as a direct result of new development. Part of our new Article 80 improvement effort will require developers to disclose the tenancies of both residents and commercial businesses on any redevelopment site, so that we can work in partnership with the developer. Most strong forward-thinking developers already do this work of working with existing tenants, but we'll have the data, we'll have the connections, we'll have the ability to intervene.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so just to add on to that, first of all, I'm grateful that pretty much the whole council is here. I think kind of building on your point earlier of how important this topic is, and we'll also say thank you to my neighbors that are here in the building. So, as of March 31st, 2025, the way we have dealt with that particular example is a member of this body would reach out, or we'll get an email from a constituent, and unfortunately it's been kind of a case-by-case, we'll talk with the landlord, we'll talk with the business owner, try to negotiate in some way to keep them there, and if not, we try to find them another location in the general vicinity. But I think, with the future and forward-looking nature of this plan, there's the Article 80 disclosure that is suggested so that the developer/landlord have to be in the conversation from the beginning in order for the project to move forward. So, right of refusal, or first, right of return, or relocation assistance, but also our CAP program, which I've mentioned anecdotally in several hearings before, that we are grateful that our team has finally developed a program that we're now fundraising for. But a program like that, I want small businesses to own their property, point blank period. I want people that live in the community to own their property in the building to prevent this type of displacement, and a number of other pieces that are within the plan that we would hope will help mitigate any issues of displacement in the future.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Councilor Pepen. I want to announce that we've been joined by the second co-sponsor, Julia Mejia. Julia, would you like to give an opening statement?
And you're utilizing your Latino roots, calling me Julia. Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate the opportunity to say hello and welcome you all to our chamber yet again. As the co-sponsor of today's hearing, I want to begin by grounding us in what I believe is the reality that so many Bostonians are facing. And this just isn't a housing crisis, it's a crisis of belonging. Too many longtime residents are being priced out of the neighborhoods that they helped us build, losing not only their homes, but also their connections and support systems and a sense of place. Everyone has a story of a neighbor who has had to leave, and I know many of the parents that I worked with back in the day, before I came into this chamber, were parent organizers, and they were trying to fight for equity in our Boston public schools, and many were afraid to do so because they knew that once our schools got better, then they would no longer be able to afford to live here because they would be displaced, which was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Is that what they say in America? Because those parents who fought to stay here now live in Brockton, Stoughton, Randolph, and over the last few years have been displaced. And so there is definitely some correlation there happening. I'm not sure what it is, but we're here to talk about anti-displacement. And just last week, our office heard from an elderly woman who spent her entire life in Boston, and now she and her son, who is living with dementia and recovering from addiction, are sleeping on a friend's couch. And she wants to come home, but Boston is no longer affordable to her. And so I'm looking forward to participating in this hearing, and I understand that the administration will be presenting, or probably we'll dive a little bit deeper into it when we ask questions around the recently released anti-displacement plan. And I'm here to listen and to ask questions. And I'm also particularly curious around the displacement, not just of folks who are trying to live here, but people who are also trying to do business here. I think all of those things are interconnected, and I'm glad to see you, Chief, here, because these are all things. If you can't afford to pay your rent, you don't have the means to bring in the income, you're going to be displaced. So I think all of these things are interconnected, and I look forward to diving in deeper. Thank you, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Next, we're going to go to Brian Morrell, who's just for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the administration for being here. I do have a few questions that I'll get to, but just looking to dive into this conversation. This conversation is important to me. I've had many conversations with a lot of you on this panel on, not only the affordability side of it, but also the inventory. I think that the production of housing also dictates who stays, right? Whether it's a studio, a one-bedroom, a two-bedroom, or a three-bedroom. The data shows who's more reliant on that type of housing. And my questions will be centered around how we build in not only family-style housing, but also the affordability side for, all working-class people here in the city of Boston. I was just looking at a number of the median household income in my district, and it's 50,000, right? And it's like, how many of, right, the private development going up in my neighborhood are those people that make $50,000 a year? Are they able to, rent any of the new construction going up in their neighborhood? So my questions will be centered around that, but that has been my advocacy ever since I've been on the council, is family-style housing, how we're doing that, and then the neighborhood affordability piece of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor Morrell. And I just want to say I'm really heartened to see such great attendance today. I know this issue is so important to Boston. And I know that displacement is both a symptom and a result of multiple overlapping dynamics: constricted housing supply mixed with increased demand, which often leads to rising rents, property values, and thereby changing the nature of neighborhoods. It is experienced differently across Boston, but its impact is felt widely. Families forced to relocate, small businesses priced out, and communities facing cultural and social erosion. But at the same time, we know that growth and new development are necessary to meet the needs of a city that continues to attract residents and jobs. The challenge before us is not whether we grow, but how we grow. I'm heartened to see the administration's new anti-displacement action plan, which offers a valuable roadmap. But often, I think what we're seeing, I think the 4 Ps described in the administration's plan, protect, preserve, and produce, protect, preserve, I think produce is the third one.
Produce and prosper.
Prosper, okay. So all the Ps, the 4 Ps, we know that they often come in tension with each other and the built and physical world. How does the administration seek to prioritize goals within these Ps and not to succumb to everything bagel liberalism, which is basically pursuing one, sometimes when you're pursuing one good, it obviously means less good of another thing, and we have to describe trade-offs, and we have to figure out, you know, there's no way to please all of those Ps at the same time, and how can we possibly sort of get at this, you know, we have a difficult thing and a difficult needle to thread. I know in my neighborhoods, we're dealing with a lot of displacement from students moving to Mission Hill and the Fenway. That is forcing people out, not in a very direct way, but in sort of an indirect way. And I remember knocking on a door of someone during my campaign and learning that they paid more to live in Mission Hill than I do in Beacon Hill, and realizing that I actually can't afford to live in Mission Hill if I wanted to move somewhere else in my district, because it's actually more expensive because of inflated housing market. It's just, we're dealing with a lot of these trade-offs, a lot of these things that we can't control. So I just kind of want to hear an answer to that question of like, how do we do it all when we know we can't do it all?
I can certainly start and turn it over to my colleagues for further response, but I think I'd say first and foremost, this is the job of good community-informed planning, right? We should be going out into neighborhoods and talking about trade-offs and talking about priorities, and then working together to establish a regulatory framework for growth of a neighborhood that centers what we heard through community voice and centers the 4 Ps we talked about. It's what Catherine and her team in creating this plan did, right? Hearing from constituents over the past 2 years. I look at our Squares and Streets effort as an example of this. I mean, Squares and Streets ultimately is a plan for predictability of growth, and it allows for different levels of density and different levels of growth that can then be applied to different neighborhoods through a community process. So, yeah, there is no, I think, just to surmise what you just said, there is no silver bullet. There is no policy solution without trade-offs. There is not any one thing that we can do that will prevent displacement and create more affordability in our city. Instead, we've got a 63-page plan of new things we want to do and a whole lot of work we've been doing for generations. Boston's got 20% of its housing stock is income-restricted affordable housing. That's more than any other community in the nation at our scale. That's great. That's something that is a strength of our city, but it's also not good enough, right? We know that so many of our neighbors, so many of our constituents are facing displacement despite all that hard work, so we have to keep going.
Thank you. And I think what I'm trying to get at is I think in every single neighborhood and every single community, there is this conversation about trade-offs. And I have found that a lot of the people that are very concerned about displacement are also not interested in building new units in their neighborhood. And we do need to create this marriage of priorities where realizing that one has an impact on another. It's not just that new development creates displacement, it's the lack of development also creates displacement. So, and I think that the plan absolutely gets at that, but it's just, I think it's important to bring that out into the open.
We emphatically agree with you, Councilor. That's why producing new housing, producing new small business opportunities is one of the 4 core central components of the plan. I think we know that if Boston did not grow at all, that does not do anything to address our housing shortage. It's a recipe for rapid displacement of our residents. Also, on the other end of the spectrum, if we grow completely unchecked without any regulation, that's also a recipe for displacing our residents. So what our collective job here is to strike a balance in the middle while we're growing the city, making sure we're growing it equitably for everyone.
Thank you so much. And next we'll go to Councilor Murphy.
Thank you. Like I said in my opening statement, important conversation, and you know, this is a lengthy, I guess if it was printed out in color, it's probably pretty. But
We'll get your color copy.
if each of you, because I assume you were all at the table and your teams, I would just like to hear from each of you what you think, what you contributed to this, or what you think is the, maybe the most important, or one of the things that you really think is going to help us. Maybe it's all the same thing, but maybe it's different things, so that would help me when I go back and kind of look at this closer, to have an idea of like your thought process of why it would then give the end result, which we know we're talking about overall displacement for residents who are either new, wanting to come in, those who have been here, business owners, and all the alike. So however you want to start.
Well, Councilor, thank you for that. And of course, I think everything on the commercial side of things is important. And so, and I have to give credit to my team and working with Catherine, for shaping a lot of what's in the commercial displacement portion of the document. I'll list the topics. I won't dive in unless you have questions on it, but I mentioned the Article 80 displacement piece, the tax relief that we're fighting for, to make sure that, a lot of our businesses have triple net leases, and so, these taxes, a lot of that's being passed down to our small business, so I think providing ways to support them is important. Personal property tax exemption, lifting that cap from 10 to 30,000. We want to double down on our space program. We are in active conversations about both evaluating the impact of the program, but also getting new money for that program. And thanks to this council, we got $10 million for the first round. Our site finding opportunities. So a lot of you have brought to us businesses that either might be getting displaced, or entrepreneurs who are looking for a space, and our small business team has utilized a tool that we adopted for the space program to help people find where they should go. And the next iteration of that is we want to have something where you don't got to call me. You can go on Boston.gov and see that, if you want to open up a barber shop, you probably shouldn't do it on Bowdoin Street because there's already 3 of them right there. So, but you should be on some other street because there's not that many. Our CAP program I mentioned, and then the inclusive economic development work that we want to continue. So, those are 7 things that are within this report that we want to continue to expand on. And as Devin mentioned, the fact, and Catherine, that, and says it in the introduction, that this is an iterative process. Somerville just last week released their small enterprise displacement plan. There are probably things in there that we want to think about adding to this. So I wish I could say one, but again, as Devin mentioned, there's no silver bullet, and all of these are going to be important for addressing displacement.
Thank you.
So I can go next. I guess my greatest contribution to this was recruiting Catherine to join the team and actually helping create a planning advisory council so that we could look at this issue cross-departmentally. I think one of the things that we've historically done is had each team sort of think about the displacement issue myopically, whether you're in the arts and cultural space, or you're in the affordable housing space, or the production space, or the small business space. We did not bring that work together comprehensively as a city and describe to everyone these are our suite of tools and this is how we need to advance that work together. So I'm really proud of the team's work. I think, like I said in the opening, this is the city has never had this before. It is certainly an evolving process. It's not perfect. It's going to get better. We're looking forward to people's comments, but the fact that we have it represents a major step forward. And I think what part of the promise of having a city planning department that is part of the city is that we do this work collaboratively and not in our separate silos.
I'll add to that point with Devin that I think when we talked with other cities across the country and we said we really heard from constituents that they wanted us to be doing a plan to mitigate residential and commercial cultural displacement, other cities said we wish we had done it that way. And it was the recognition that folks really did feel a loss when they lost their small business, they lost their faith community, they lost a gathering space that was really critically important to them. And so I think that's one thing that we brought into this plan, as Devin noted, and what that you see here. Absent only our both interim Chief of Arts and Cultural, Kenny Mascari, but also Joseph Henry, our Director of Cultural Planning, who was closely involved in the work. And then the second thing I would draw your attention to, Councillor, is trying to be thoughtful about implementation. It's easy sometimes to do a laundry list of sort of programs and initiatives, but really thinking, we really tried to take the other step and say, how can we ensure that people have access to existing services, and thinking about that in our implementation. How can we make sure that we revisit the plan I liken it sometimes to climate action planning. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we didn't even have a baseline, and now we're on our second and third iteration. So we can only build if we have the foundation, and so we needed to create that in the process. And so we tried to be thoughtful in the implementation of this and make sure that our community knows when the plan is published, it doesn't mean we're done. It means that we're equipping our own staff to engage thoughtfully and respectfully on this topic through planning initiatives, whether it's on green infrastructure and transportation or on neighborhood planning, together with community.
And I do love that. Devon's greatest accomplishment is hiring a woman that feels very feminist icon. So maybe Devon might be our feminist icon of the day. Chief Dillon, did you have another answer?
I'm going to add that I think what I find probably most important about this plan is things that we've already heard today, right? It speaks to existing residents that are in a unit in a neighborhood right now and are feeling threatened. So it's like new tools, and I think of an updated condo conversion ordinance, access to counsel that we mentioned, the AOP program, like things that are going to impact people's lives like right now. But then I think the plan also talks about how we're going to grow, and I think Devon mentioned it. How are we going to do large-scale, smaller developments in such a way that displacement is front and center, like a review in the Article 80 process, home ownership, co-purchasing, making sure that new development people can purchase, housing accelerator fund, and making sure that the new housing that's built and unlocked through that has really good affordability built in. So it's both taking care of what is and then doing new differently. So that's what resonates for me.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Flynn, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't get a chance yet to read this report, the anti-displacement report. I will read that today and tonight and tomorrow. Is there an amount that the city is committed to spending to support all the initiatives in that plan?
It's a great and important question, Councillor. The majority of items outlined in the plan, because of the moment we're in and the need to be fiscally responsible, the priorities that are outlined in the plan overwhelmingly do not require new resources on the part of the city. There are some significant investments that the council's already aware of, including a $110 million investment in the Housing Accelerator Fund, which would both yield more housing and more income-restricted housing. And then there are a handful of things that would come before the council for the upcoming budget cycle, but they're fairly modest and helping to lay really important foundation. So an example of that would be basement unit protection. So understanding where there is direct displacement risk from flooding and beginning to gather more information, starting with East Boston, beginning to gather more information on where those units are so that we can actively intervene and make sure that those residents are protected. But for the most part, overwhelmingly, what's in here is already included in the city's budget or has already been shared and committed.
Thank you. What's in this report that would help disabled veterans, that would help military families stay in their homes? What specifically is in there that can help our veterans?
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, Catherine, but I don't think veterans are called out as a category, but that's good input for us to take, because this is a comment period on this plan too. It hasn't been, the ink is not dry, and we're certainly interested in your comments. Certainly additional protections on our existing tenants, but all of the programs that we're going to enhance for folks as we develop and as we help homeowners and as we develop more specialized housing. So I think there is new tools that help, like I said, existing renters, existing residents, but also additional affordability protections as we develop new. But if you do feel like there's things after you read it, Counselor, that are very specific to a population that you care deeply about, then that is the input that we would really greatly appreciate.
Yeah, thank you, Sheila. I do know oftentimes veterans are not included in protected categories. But by law, they are included in protected categories. I follow that closely, and I go to Washington, D.C. to testify in support of the disabled American veterans. But I would like for us going forward to include veterans in everything we do in terms of protected categories. I think it's the law, I think, and I also think our veterans have earned that, especially during difficult times, supporting disabled veterans, supporting women veterans, supporting homeless veterans. The highest group of homeless veterans is women veterans. So I feel like we all have an obligation to support women veterans. That's a priority of mine. So I'd like to work with this administration going forward to ensure that veterans and military families are included in protected categories. My second point, I think Councilor Mejia may have mentioned it at the beginning of her opening statements, but I have also heard from longtime residents of the city that may have bought their home 50, 60 years ago, and maybe the home now is worth $800,000, maybe it's worth $900,000. They might be living on a pension of $40,000 a year. Their property taxes continue to go up. They're on a fixed income, and they're barely making it. They're barely able to pay their bills. I see them at the various stores in South Boston looking at soup and trying to figure out if they can buy a can of Campbell's soup or not based on the money they have in their pocket. But what are we doing specifically for long-time residents that have bought their home a long time ago, that are on fixed income, that are having difficult time paying their bills and staying in their place?
So you raising, seniors are very, very much a focus in this plan, and we're seeing two categories of seniors that are at risk. And you mentioned homeowners, and certainly we're very interested in the residential tax legislation passing that would allow them to have a lower residential bill. But even in addition to that, we're working now with some nonprofits to see if we can't build more housing for people that are ready to sell their homes and downsize. So we're very, very interested in that as a model, really as a continuum. I will say we're also working with an unfortunate number of seniors that have lived in the same rental unit, and there are many in your neighborhood, for decades, not even years, but decades. And I'm working with Emily Shea, the commissioner, and it's also in the plan that we start meeting with seniors early on. Oftentimes they think that the situation, because they've lived there for 20, 30, 40 years, that it's going to remain the same, and then the building is sold, and then they end up in a very unfortunate position. So really starting to meet with seniors across the city and have them start planning for what could happen, and getting their names on senior, many of the senior affordable housing lists early, doing financial planning early. If they want to sell their home, thinking about that now, because oftentimes they'll wait and then we have a crisis versus really working with them early on, which is what they deserve. So there is a call out in the plan for a lot of work with our seniors. If there's things that you think that we've missed, please, please, please let us know. But it's a very important constituency, and as you know, oftentimes very much at risk.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Fitzgerald?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. Thank you all for being here. I'm looking at the 26 new tools, and I know that the sums with some of them have the asterisk on it. That's just the ones that are in the home rule petition, I imagine, right? So those are not yet part of it, but maybe will be one day. Out of the other ones, The city has proposed 26 new or improved policies. How many of the other, I guess 21, I believe there's 5 asterisks, how much of the other 21 are new versus just tweaks to currently? I'm sort of just curious, really.
I can count for you, Counselor. How many of them are new versus existing, versus improvements to existing?
Yeah,
Sure.
I was just curious. It's like, I'll try and give you some filler time here. You do the count. Just curious as the fact of like, how many of these are like, okay, we've got to really like wrap our head around this new one, understand the impacts of it, like what are some of the secondary, tertiary impacts or negatives that might even come of this, and what ones have like, we've kind of know what they do and we've thought it out and we're just tweaking to adapt to today's environment.
Sure. About 16 or 17 of the residential tools are, I would say, net new versus, like an example of an improvement would be the condo conversion ordinance. It already exists.
Right.
We see an opportunity to work with the council to improve that. So the majority of them are new priorities that have emerged through the prioritization process of engaging with community. There are a number of priorities that were expressly asked for and highlighted by community as part of the fair housing assessment that was published in 2022. So again, some of these communities been asking for a long time, and this is our chance to be public about both making progress against them and then also holding ourselves accountable for delivering on them.
Great. Thank you. In terms of, I know a lot of this stuff is right, it's always like income based. But in terms of who we're helping, is there anything that's specifically around families? I know families can be included in a lot of these things, but I'm trying to think of applications that would go towards family specifically, because that is what I believe is sort of we're losing the most of in this city.
Do you want to talk about access to counsel?
Sure. Well, Councilor Weber just left, but certainly access to counsel is resources that this council has made available specifically for legal representation for families in BPS.
Great.
Right. I would assume, Councilor, things like co-purchasing too. Yes, 2 sisters could be buying, but I think we're going to see extended families. In fact, some of the calls that we're getting early on for interest in the program, very much family-based. So I think there are, even though they're not saying for families only, most of these, I think we're going to see a lot of families come forward and use the new programs and policies.
And I think probably the ADU, which is not new news, but obviously the city's effort with MOH and the planning department, the investment in ADUs also provide an opportunity for folks to welcome a family member onto their property and help mom move in.
No, that's great. I'd love to see, even if it was called out as a family specific in any future tool, I think that sort of, it gets those folks to, the ears perk up when they go, oh, this is, for me, rather than just the more general description of it. The Article 80 direct displacement stuff, that is if you are, I can only imagine, like literally you are going to build where there is someone is living currently. It is not the impact on the surrounding community, correct?
That's accurate. Direct displacement of either commercial or residential tenant.
Gotcha. Thank you. And finally, this is sort of, I don't really expect it. It's more of a philosophical question, but the way we are set up, right, is that when you make it, we want to improve our neighborhoods. We want to improve our housing. We want to improve our local businesses. But inherently that comes with a continued higher costs, higher rate. So is there anything we can combat? We can have 26 new ways to come at this. But is it more inherently the system that might be broken in terms of that how do we actually improve without displacement? It sort of seems at the basis that is the natural occurrence of things, and we try to beat it back as much as we can in as many different ways. But with that still as the crux of it all, it's like, are we running against the wind a little bit here?
We are running. We're running with the wind, perhaps. I do think that the more we don't have a lot of the tools like rent stabilization and things like that, but I do think the more housing we build that has income restrictions, right? Beautiful new housing, oftentimes in areas or lots that have been, really you would describe as disinvestment. then we get the best of both worlds, right? We get improvements in neighborhoods, usually first floor retail or community space, and then we are able to welcome residents that were at risk. To me, that's perfect, right? But I do think if we're going to have market forces, what we've put in this plan makes sense, that if a developer's coming in and says, hey, I'm going to tear down this, I don't know, auto body shop, right? Or I'm going to take down this older, very obsolete, non-historic, two-family home, and I'm going to build 30 new units. We're saying now, and the planning department will say, well, what's happening to those two families that are in the two-family home? And you've got a very aggressive affordability requirements, and we're going to do good design. And so while it's imperfect and it feels like a puzzle sometimes, I think building more income restricted housing and businesses that own their own properties, perfect. And then new development, holding developers more accountable.
Great. Thank you so much.
Well, Councilor, I'll just say that it's the $1 trillion question.
Right.
Can you develop a community without displacing the folks who've made it what it is? And I think what this plan is seeking to do, I mean, the chief is absolutely right, and I think all of us here are working to make Boston the first city to answer that question as yes, you can. And that's actually something that Councilor Mejia says all the time, is about being resource rich but coordination poor. The plan, first of all, brings all those resources together, as you've heard Catherine and others say. But then there's other tools that we can add to the toolbox. And then there's things that are happening throughout the administration, throughout the city, that are not talked about here. I mean, part of it is, what types of jobs do people have to be able to afford, no matter what, if rent is going up? Are we connecting folks to, career pathways, et cetera, schools, et cetera, right? Things that won't necessarily be in the anti-displacement plan, but are part of anti-displacement work. So, our hope is that this document, as iterative as it is, as open and live as it is, will add more tools that allow us, again, to be the first city to say yes and to prove it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for answering very hard questions very well, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Fitzgerald, and Councilor Mejia, often replicated, never duplicated. I feel like she's the most quotable city councilor in terms of like all the so that was a great call out. I did want to just let you all know that Chief Idawu has to run to something else, but he's going to try to make his way back if we're still in question and answer. He has a meeting right now, but he'll be right back. I mean, he's not moving too quickly, so. Okay, so we're going to go to Councilor Worrell. Thank you so much.
Oh. Wasn't ready. Can I defer my time for?
Yeah, you can go later.
Yeah.
Okay. Councilor Weber?
Sure, okay. No? Yep, okay. Thank you very much, Chair. I guess, Chief Dillon, we talked about access to council, and I think I was going through the Green New Deal, and I think the mayor, when she was a city councilor, wrote about access to council in the Green New Deal, and it's obviously, there was a lot of support there. I don't think the program would have existed today without your advocacy, so thank you very much. In terms of that, right now it's a pilot. We're providing it for families with children in school here in Boston. Is there any look to expand it? Who should, generally these kinds of pilots, they include seniors, or they include people at a certain income threshold. Any thoughts on expansion and where we should look?
Sure. So I'm happy that we're starting them with BPS families. I think I think it was a very good call from your office to do that. I think seniors also need a program, because it's court can be a very scary place. Legal process can be a very scary place. So I would welcome that. We are meeting with, we're very interested in what the state's going to do in their budget session. We are going to be meeting with Speaker Michaelwitz.
Chairman.
Oh, you're just speaking preemptively.
No, I am. I'm so sorry. It came out of my mouth. I said, that's not right, Rep. Michaelwitz. If he's
It's right, it's just not now.
If he's watching, anyways. So we're going to be meeting with him soon to kind of look at the budget, look at the legislation. So it would be wonderful if the state actually put additional resources in for access to council. So I think we're very interested in how our Boston pilot goes, and can we expand it if the resources were there, and then looking at the state to see, because when the state allocates resources, Boston does a very good job of accessing those resources and spending those resources. We have a good partnership with the state. So I think it's going to be or we're going to be just looking for additional resources and allocation here at the city and also at the state level. I'm not looking at the feds right now.
Okay, yeah, I wouldn't either. I guess, I think Chair Durkin brought this up. And sometimes, and I guess part of it is looking at the anti-displacement, the map, I can't remember what it's called, but I live in Jamaica Plain, and it's a low displacement risk. Is that because everyone's already been displaced, and then people in the neighborhood, exactly, and then so people talk, they say, well, if you allow more development, you're just going to drive up the cost, but my sense is you need to build, you're going to create more space, and you increase supply, and it's going to reduce demand, whatever basic 10th grade economics that I have. But how would you respond to, the sort of pushback I certainly see in my district, which is, well, you're just bringing in market rate housing, like that's going to raise the cost of housing overall, because you're just you're adding in people who can pay that much. I guess Dev,
yeah.
you want to start?
I'm happy to start, and I'm sure Sheila and Catherine might want to jump in. I think this is a theme of this whole conversation. There's a lot of nuance to this. There is no silver bullet. There is no absolutist position. It seemed like, I think I already said this, but just say it again. I think it is very clear that if we didn't grow at all, that is a recipe for creating a massive housing shortage and displacing most of Boston's low-income families. On the other hand, if we go the other way, where we have a completely deregulated environment, we grow, we don't try to shape growth to benefit those at risk of displacement, then that is also going to lead to displacement. So we need to balance these things. And that is a conversation we need to be having with communities, and we need to be having it at the citywide level, and we need to be having it at the local level. So a lot of the document that, or the document that you have is a citywide plan, and then we want to work with communities to apply it locally. And I think you can use that, the displacement risk tool, to think about priorities during a rezoning process or an Article 80 review process. Where do we want mitigation to go? What types of uses do we want to see in our Main Street districts? What types of overall density? We can use that as an input to a tool to guide a conversation. It doesn't tell you what the absolute outcome should be, because I do not think there is a clear answer to this. It's a balanced answer.
I think, as the councilor well knows, everyone in this room knows, Bostonians love their neighborhoods. And they are invested in their neighborhoods, whether they live there now or whether they lived there before and they want to come back. And I think we heard that loud and clear through the plan. And so, and one of the most finite resources we have in addition to our people is land. We have a lot of water and not a lot of land in this city. And so we have, as Devin said, we have an opportunity and a need to grow. And adding housing in a neighborhood both creates an opportunity for a mom who might be ready to sell, for your kids who might want to stay close to home, or for someone who no longer lives in that neighborhood but wants to get back to their neighbors, wants to get back to the services and resources and community that they had to leave. And I think inclusionary zoning is an incredibly powerful tool that is not relegated to any one part of the city. It's a citywide zoning tool, and so that means that as we grow, we can be adding supply for folks of all incomes. And I think, for the residents that are there now, Importantly, something like the co-purchasing program that Sheila's advancing creates an opportunity for people to pool resources and together buy a home. It also becomes a tool to counter speculators, and we say that in the plan, where because our triple deckers and our two families are sort of at a price point where they are out of reach of sort of an average income household, if they can pool their resources, then they become a credible response to speculators, and they're able to buy that triple decker in a way that families, certainly in my neighborhood in Roslindale, I have a lot of families that live on a ground floor in a triple decker and bought those properties at a time, whether they're 90 or they, are a current family with kids, they bought those properties at a time when they could afford to buy that on one income. And then the last thing I'll say, Councilor, is that the Article 80 displacement disclosure we see as a really, it's new, it fills a really specific gap, but we see it as an opportunity to work in partnership with a proponent and as the city to be at the table to ensure that residents, if they are getting displaced, both have predictability, they know where they're going, and then also, again, in partnership, that they have potentially an option to return to the new units that are built on site, whether they're income eligible for income restricted or they have right of first refusal for market rate units. And that's something we've heard is important to people as we've gotten input on that new tool.
Yeah, just one comment. I won't ask a question, Chair. In terms of the map, I represent West Roxbury and JP. Access to council started with a senior who called me who said she could not afford her rent anymore. I think even though it's designated as low risk, I see that as more that the median income may be higher, but plenty of people are at risk. I've heard, seniors, young families, small businesses that can't afford the rent. So I would look at that. Just lastly from this morning, and this is just a comment, we talked about rising insurance costs because of rising sea levels. And so I on the list of things that might displace people, I think increasingly are going to be these are for homeowners, but might also increase rent. I don't know what we can do to mitigate those.
No
those
questions.
No, I don't know what we can do.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Not a question mark. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
Can
Do
you want to just on his last point, just to respond to the question, one of the things in the plan to draw your attention to, Council Weber, is the community rating system. The community rating system, as I understand it from my colleagues in Environment, and Energy, and Open Space, is something that we can apply for, and we have to detail how we are proactively investing in closing flood pathways, and that will have a positive impact on, particularly on insurance flooding for our residents.
And it makes a lot of sense. Now we're going to our coastal resilience counselor. So, Counselor Coletta Zapata, go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for your work. I appreciate everything you all do and the great questions from my colleagues. I'm going to zero in on, well, before I get to that, just setting the stage, and I didn't get a chance to provide an opening statement, but we all know what's happening in East Boston. Home values have soared 227% since 2011, the most out of any neighborhood. I have childhood friends that have been displaced. They now live in Saugus, and I mean, it's something that we're hearing from all neighborhoods, but East Boston, I can say kind of definitively is ground zero for displacement and gentrification, although I was on this incredible new tool, the interactive map, and Councilor Worrell and I were trying to figure out the impact on both of our communities, because we're in the purple here. I think the scale goes from 0 to 6.8, and there are places in my neighborhood where it is at 6.8, the displacement risk, and it's insane. And I know that my colleague has the same sort of impacts happening in his community. I wanted to zero in on how this does or does not supplement affirmatively furthering fair housing. And I know that there's been some discussion about it in here on page 4, and I was trying to read through it. But for those of you who don't know, in 2021, the city was the first city to pass or to add fair housing requirements to its zoning code. And so based on the Article 80 process, developers had to choose among a variety of fair housing interventions, such as building a greater share of affordable units, building more family units, or providing more units to residents with housing vouchers. The goal of the fair housing zoning requirement was for proposed projects to take meaningful actions to address displacement and provide further access to housing in a way that is clear, consistent, predictable, and fair. We had developed this Article 80 displacement assessment that the BIFDEC, I think, is it the BIFDEC, reviews. You had just mentioned something to the effect of an Article 80 displacement disclosure. How is that different? How is it the same? And how will they work together?
So to start with the macro question about firmly furthering fair housing. So that, like you said, we're the first city in the nation to adopt that into our zoning code, and I think we can see the risk map helping us advance that work in a couple of different scales. At the more targeted project level scale, certainly during an IAG conversation or a community conversation about mitigating the impacts of development or establishing community benefits, having that data, knowing about displacement risk can help inform that conversation and can be part of our training programs for future IAGs so that IAG members know about displacement risk in an empirical way in their neighborhoods. It can also help us target, using the disclosures, target actual mitigation to the individuals, businesses, and residents being displaced. So again, that's something that I think the best developers in town already do as part of their community benefits packages, thinking about how to relocate the existing culturally significant institutions and businesses and the individuals living on site, but that's something we want to expect from all of our developers. So I'd start there.
It's a great question, Councilor. It's something we've thought a lot about. And I don't have a slide to show you how all these different puzzle pieces fit together, but we do have it. The city has 3 really powerful tools that focus on economic displacement that may be associated with large developments. So we have inclusionary zoning, which, as the council knows, the mayor recently expanded to buildings with 7 or more units, and that applies to all projects. We have linkage fees, which are associated with labs and large commercial developments, which creates the resources that we need to then be able to invest in additional housing, particularly additional income-restricted housing. And then we have affirmatively furthering fair housing, which in the zoning code presently applies to large residential projects. What we haven't had is, and as originally conceived, fair housing was both meant to combat economic displacement and discrimination. And so the BIFDEC is making recommendations to large residential projects to combat those 2 particular forces. What we didn't have, and what the direct displacement disclosure is the gap that is meant to fill, is for speak of my colleagues in planning small projects, large projects, and PDAs, really help us understand direct displacement of small businesses, of residential tenants associated with a specific project. So those people that are there, so that we and the proponent and the city can actually work together to ensure that we do right by those folks. And so in the plan, some of the things that we talk about in regards to affirmatively furthering fair housing, zoning, and the BIFDEC in particular, is to make sure that these 2, the direct displacement disclosure and the AFFH process, work together in tandem so that those particular projects that are subject to that additional process in the zoning code are really doing everything they can both to combat displacement and ensure access to those units, and some of the exact examples that you shared, and then that is complemented by the direct displacement disclosure. And I apologize because that was a very, it's something that is easy to diagram and hard to explain with words. I would be happy to share with the council how we think about these pieces together and as a complement.
Thank you. And Chair, just a quick comment and just to clarify, and I wanted to make sure that what was being pushed forward. So it says the BIFDEC will explore new AFFH zoning interventions and practices to position proponents to choose to better address economic displacement in high-risk project areas. And so my question was more like, it's not going to substitute the hard work that we did in 2020 to 2021. It's going to complement it at the end of the day. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, next we're going to go to Julia Mejia. I know you've waited patiently, so and you're the second or the first co-sponsor. So thank you.
Thank you. And Councilor Durkin, you've always called me Julia Mejia, so I'm curious Have you been hanging out with Latinos this weekend?
Well, my mom's name is literally Juanita Ruiz,
Okay,
so
'cause it's been weird to hear you call me Julia. I've never heard you say that, so I'm wondering what happened this weekend.
I was in Mission Hill, you know.
That's what it
Yeah.
was. Okay, something must have happened because you came back all Latina. Okay, I'm teasing. All right, so I do appreciate the fact that everybody usually invokes my spirit in this chamber. I'm gonna be the ghost that haunts you guys forever. But anyways, I would like to, just for consideration, add a few P's that are missing to your action plan. Is that okay? Are we taking notes and taking feedback? All right. So I'd like to add people and the role that they play in these processes, and I'd like to add process and how we go about doing business. And I'm sure it's probably outlined here, but within a framework around defining who we are and how we want to show up, I think adding a P for people so that people know that we are centering them and their voices and their experiences and how we move in this way would be really comforting. And then the other P is for process, because I oftentimes hear that things are being done to us without us, and there's opportunity for us to really get these processes right. And I think that we should add that as a pillar of the P's. I don't know, what do you all think of that? Worth debating?
No, I mean, I think they're excellent points, Counselor, and I think the priorities of constituents have been absolutely at the center from the beginning of this process, and that even we say in the plan, there are three things that drove what was in it. Is there a known gap? Is it a priority for community? And can we do it? And then I think in the can we do it, that's really where we try to center process, that there's a lot of tools and resources, including internal training and internal understanding that we lay out as part of this plan that's really integral to doing this work successfully.
See, for me, a lot of this is my experience in this chamber is different because I'm still very much, even though I'm here and I'm a politician, I still feel very much connected to the outside world, right? And so for me, that's the voice that I'd like to bring in here. And I feel like processes, even access to language and how we're communicating, these things feel so far removed from people's realities. And a 26-page paper, I don't know how long it is, but I got to read it too, like Counselor Flynn, I haven't done my homework, but I think it becomes overwhelming. And I think that when we're thinking about people's livelihoods, I think there's an opportunity for us to also make it easier, more digestible for folks to kind of like, what's the final number here? Like, how many people are we going to keep from being displaced as a result of this? Like, those tangibles will really be helpful, at least when I'm thinking about the impact, right? Intention versus impact. I'm also curious about how the city will ensure coordination across departments and avoid duplications or delays in implementing the 40+ tools. Just curious about what that looks like. And I'm curious how the city is reconciling with the dual identity as both as a developer and a regulator in neighborhoods, where they're simultaneously upzoning, selling public land, and wanting to address displacement. Here's the concern that I've been trying to grapple with, right? Is that now that we have abolished the BPDA, which is now inside city planning, it gives us an opportunity to be more coordinated. However, there are some concerns, at least from folks around kind of the decision-making processes, how you all are now the planner, the developer, the regulator, and oftentimes even sometimes the financial decision maker when you're partnership with mass housing, right, with the 110 million accelerator, right? So there's all of these things interconnected, so it would be helpful to understand how we're going to keep ourselves accountable to making sure that we're centering people at all times in every decision that we make. I'm curious about how much funding is already committed versus pending. I think there's like, will ARPA replacements like CPA linkage fees or other new revenue sources, transfer fees, how will they be used? I'm curious about that. And I have a whole bunch of other questions, and I'll wait for my second round, but for now, let's start with those.
I think you're, I'm trying to think where to start, Councilor. Thank you so much for all the questions and encouragement, frankly, because this work is only possible as a cross-cabinet initiative. So I'm Executive Director of the Planning Advisory Council. The PAC, as we call it, is a 9-member cabinet. It's chaired by the Chief of Planning, but it includes both the chiefs at the table and a number of other chiefs who were both part of the plan and who are part of the PAC to support better cross-departmental coordination and collaboration. So it will take all of us to deliver on the plan. We have detailed in the plan both shifting to a formal working group. We've had an informal working group pulling together all of the different departments that are contributing to this work and shifting into a delivery mode with that group as we get through the comment period. We're anticipating a year 1 report back to the public so that we can hold ourselves accountable and say, here's how we're making progress, and that the plan itself will be a 2-year rollout period. Now, there's pieces in the plan that we know folks want us to move on faster. The displacement disclosure associated with Article 80 is one of those things. And then there's, we've shared publicly the status of each item, where we are farther along in the stages and where we're in the very early stages. And if I can just say, the PAC has 3 objectives: improve cross-departmental coordination and collaboration, accelerate plan implementation, and improve transparency and accountability with the public. Agnostic of plans, but certainly we are deeply committed to the anti-displacement plan, and so you can hold us to account that I hope you'll see that with this work, and we are very specific about how we will deliver on that.
So is anyone going to answer my question regarding the upzoning, selling public land, that you know, the elephant in the room that everybody wants to know, how we are both going to be the planner, the developer, the accountability oversight partner? Like, what's that look like?
Yeah, happy to take that one. I think that's exactly that. It's the response to that criticism that led to the mayor proposing this council adopting the move to the planning department. For 70 years of Boston's history, planning was done through a quasi-governmental board that was a real estate development company that existed outside of public oversight, outside of this body's oversight, and it was accountable to a 5-member board. What we've done through creating the planning department is moved that function into city government. All of those employees now work for you, the elected officials of Boston, the people of Boston. We are responsible for coming here and reporting on our activities. There still is a real estate development entity. That's, I think, important, and most cities have that. But the staff of that agency works for the city, not for that redevelopment entity. And we are bringing, through Catherine's work and others, the other disciplines of planning to the table, not focused myopically. So not going to change levels of trust in our communities overnight. I think trust is built over time through our actions, but the governance change to create a planning department decentralizes that power and it gives it back to this council and to the city of Boston.
And to the people, right? Is that where the council, your advisory council, this is where they fit in, Catherine?
The residents of Boston?
Yeah. Like who? Like where are the people in that, please? Is it the
I would argue,
advisory?
I would say the residents of Boston are at the table through the planning process, and an anti-displacement plan is one type of plan that is reflective of what we've heard from community over many months and years, and through specifically in relation to the anti-displacement work, equipping our planners. And that's planners in the planning department, but we've got planners in transportation, we've got planners in the parks department. So equipping and all of our planners with the tools and understanding and methods to engage with community around displacement and have productive conversations with community at the table.
I'm going to wait. I know my time is up, and I do appreciate the grace. I'll wait for my second round. Thank you.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what we were gonna do, and are you ready to go, Councilor Rell? So we'll go to Councilor Rell, he'll have 5 minutes, and then Councilor Pepin, he saw some of his constituents here. He didn't want them to have to wait any longer. So we are going to do public testimony, and then we're gonna get back to questions if that works for the panel. Okay, thank you. Okay, Councilor Rell, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And looking at the anti-displacement map, as Council Coletta Zapata has mentioned, that, our district has 2 areas that are purple. And, one of the concerns that I hear in my neighborhood is that, when we're modernizing or trying to streamline or make production of housing a lot faster, and haven't solved for displacement yet in terms of affordability or family housing, then we will continue, down that trend of displacement. So in terms of like the BPDA's role in engaging developers on the Article 80, like how do we engage differently in these areas? Are we using AMI levels and encouraging developers to, be more neighborhood specific when it comes to affordability? Are we encouraging them, to build more family style housing in these areas where, based on the data, we see that it's needed? As everyone knows, I am a big advocate for home ownership. I think it's one of the ways that we create predictable and stable payments, because even, with the rental stabilization bill that this council passed, we were still allowing for year over year, I believe it was 6% increase? 6% plus CPI in, the most expensive real estate market in the country, right, that people can't already afford. And then also when it comes to pushing developers, are we ensuring that there are retail options that are appropriate?
Yes. Thank you, Councilor. Great questions. The answer is yes to all of them. And thank you for your advocacy in support of homeownership across Boston and in support of small business growth. So the ways in which we say yes to those questions, central to that is the affirmatively furthering fair housing work, where we look at displacement risk and the need for more family-sized units. We bring that to a conversation with the developer, and we also often push for homeownership, and you've done that very effectively in your district. I think this really comes down to the fact that there's only a couple of ironclad solutions that prevent displacement. If a business owns their unit, their land, they're protected from displacement. If a homeowner owns their home, they're protected from displacement. Or if they live in if a renter lives in income restricted housing that exists outside of the market, where rents are tied to incomes, not to the market, those are solutions that prevent those individual businesses and residents from displacement. And we have lots of tools that are in this plan and in the toolkit that advance the further development of ownership of land and ownership of residents, and advance creating more income restricted housing. And we also have to work with the market too. And we have to regulate as best as possible, using all the tools that are available to actually continue to grow the city. Because I think we keep coming back to, we can't not grow. That is absolutely a recipe for displacement, but we have to grow in a way that benefits all Bostonians.
And to that point, are we able to see how many studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms has been approved, this year, last year? Get a breakdown of that?
We absolutely have that data. I don't have it in front of me, but I'm happy to share it with you.
All right. And then was kind of getting an idea of like how has production impacted rents in different neighborhoods on different types of properties, right? Or units. Like, are we seeing an increase more in rents for 3 bedrooms, right?
Yeah.
And less of an increase in studios and 1 bedrooms? Do we have that information?
I might defer to Sheila to see what she's seeing in the market. I think at a macro level, what we know is that lack of housing supply leads to rent growth and sales price growth. Just basic supply and demand. If Massachusetts adds no new housing and people want to keep moving here and keep growing our families, there's going to be an increasing lack of supply, and prices will go up. At a very local level, at the sort of like block or neighborhood level, the data is mixed on whether an increase in supply generates rent growth or moderates rents. And there are a lot of a lot of factors go into that, and the displacement risk map can help us with that. But for Sheila, any data
We are just updating the rental data. We do have it by neighborhood, and I believe we've got it by unit type and size. So let me check with staff. I know they're working on updating it right now, and I can get that to you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor Rowell. So next we're going to head to public testimony, and I'll just read the order in which we're going to do this, but if each of you can line up. Scott Beatty, Lori Radwin, Ken Fields, sorry, I don't know if I read that correctly, Marlon Salomon. If you guys can line up in that order, starting with Scott Beatty, and you'll each get 2 minutes. I know many of you know the drill. So. And you can use either microphone. Okay, Scott, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I thought I had 3, but that's all. Let's talk fast. My name is Scott Beatty, and I'm a 35-year resident in Hyde Park, very involved with my community over the years, and been part of a local citizens group that filed a citizens petition with the city as it relates to the Squares and Streets initiative in my community. Thank you, everyone, for having me speak today, particularly Councilor Pepin, who's our representative. And anyway, we recognize the recent release of the city's anti-displacement action plan, not done through the lens of Squares and Streets initiative, but our reaction is really focused through that lens because that's what we're dealing with right now in our community. We've read through the plan. We recognize it's obviously very high quality, well conceived, containing comprehensive actions that clearly, as stated by Mayor Wu in the summary, working to help our population thrive and grow, make Boston a home for everyone. From jump, we've said we want to be part of the solution. We know that the city has a housing crisis. We've asked from the very beginning that we work at the speed of trust with our community in finding those solutions, and we still state that. We feel our beloved Cleary Logan Square in Hyde Park has some unique characteristics, very high proportion of first-generation BIPOC businesses in our district. While at first blush that might not be unique to the city, but we have a very high concentration of owners. Only 3 or 4 owners control about 40% of the square footage in Cleary Square. So we believe that our small businesses are going to be swept right out of the square. We have the lowest cost per square foot in the city of Boston, and we feel that without some pretty significant protections, they're going to be displaced. The displacement risk map shows us a very high risk. My good friend Marlon Solomon is going to talk about that map. We feel that the tools there's some tools there that are beneficial, but we feel that unless our small business owners are able to purchase their buildings, that they're going to be, our Pedro, Ulrich, Miguel, and Joseph in our community are going to be removed from our community. Finally, we just ask that we're asking that the city use that 2-year time frame to implement this displacement plan, but we're asking that further zoning codification cease until that plan is worked with through our community, through affordable housing, market rate developers, owners, and businesses to come up with a mechanism to assure that we're not going to create a perfect storm with this proposed development. We fear that the 4 pillars that are talked about as far as anti-displacement, that as the proposed S&S plan is currently, that would accelerate displacement in our neighborhood, and we don't want that to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And just flagging that if anyone has any additional comments and you run out of time, you can also send them to the committee email if helpful, and I can make them part of the public record. Next, we'll go to Lori Radwin. Good to see you, Lori.
Actually, people should have a hard copy of my testimony as well, so I will be fast. Thank you very much for the anti-displacement plan. It has many needed interventions, and we thank you. I do want to address AFFH. It came up in a couple of questions from the counselors.
If you can speak into the mic.
Yes, I can. Thank you. And I want to talk about the new zoning initiatives related to AFFH. A blue ribbon group looked at Squares and Streets and AFFH, and they decided that Squares and Streets has the potential for particular harm to fair housing. Why did they say so? For one, Squares and Streets aims to speed up the development of new housing by creating standard as-of-right zoning. However, the Squares and Street zoning does not detail the impact of its zoning on naturally occurring affordable housing, and nor does the new zoning provide that protected classes will be especially empowered to live in this new housing. There are no provisions in Squares and Streets that will further goals of equity or decrease segregation or housing instability. The mobility challenges of persons with disabilities and elders, both protected classes, are not considered in Squares and Streets. There's no requirement for parking, and yet there's a failure to examine the different neighborhoods' elder and disabled members' reliance on cars and need for parking. Squares and Streets as-of-right developments could actually consume acres of land for market rate or luxury housing that could otherwise be used for affordable housing. Again, this came from a Blue Ribbon panel. I can't count credit for these. They saw Squares and Streets as a threat to AFFH, and what they concluded was that an independent, expert fair housing audit would be necessary before moving the Squares and Street zoning forward. And so we respectfully request that both the administration and the city council take a look at this and assure that that fair housing assessment is completed before Squares and Street zoning is codified. And you can have my 3 seconds.
Thank you, Lori. And if you wouldn't mind sending that report just so it can be part of the record, if you haven't already.
I'll check.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It should be in the mayor's office. I believe it was submitted there.
Yeah, just as part of this hearing, that would be good. Thank you. Ken Fields?
Madam Chair, thank you, and thank you, Councilor Pepin, for having us. I was not necessarily coming here to speak, but I came in support of my colleagues. I do want to echo some things. Squares and Streets, I think, was meeting a very important goal, but done in complete tunnel vision. And during the early parts of that process, most of our concerns were completely dismissed by Boston Planning, BPDA, whatever the entity is, staff, completely dismissed. And it looks like there's some progress being made. But again, speed of trust is what we've asked for, and we haven't felt that we've received it. And the location of our Squares and Streets plan is very similar to the location of these areas that are at most risk for displacement. I would like to yield the rest of my time to a much more eloquent Marlon.
Thank you so much. I won't comment on your eloquence, but we are so happy that you're here.
All right.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, thank you
Marlon.
for yielding your time. I don't think I've ever had time yielded to me, so I take it very nicely. So thank you, everyone, for having this meeting here today, and also just thank you to all the hard work. I went through the document and everything, and I know there was a lot of hard work being put towards that, so I just want to say a sincere thank you for putting a lot of our concerns, I think, that were collected over the Squares and Streets thing into that, and I actually saw that. My area of expertise is mostly around the history of Boston infrastructure and the historic ties to redlining and the Boston Bank Urban Renewal Group area. And so just a little pushback on something that was said earlier about building more housing, if you need to build more housing in order to stop displacement. I think that comment is probably more relevant in a community that hasn't been disinvested from. Once you have a community that's been disinvested from, and another thing I'm going to say is that, let me just say that the words disinvestment is not really what happened. A community was identified and infrastructure was cut off to that community. So that's what we're dealing with now. And your displacement map, when I saw it, I was like, I can't believe they gave me this, because it literally there's almost no difference in the 1938 map to now. You can see exactly where the places are. Any difference is just that they've been gentrified since that time. So I wanted to point out that now I can see the city going along the old trolley lines and trying to reinvest in those communities. But these areas are no longer the same as they were back then. These areas are historically disinvested. So they're hypersensitive to any small investment you put into the area. Because the community, like, let's say Franklin Park, it's not supposed, that's my first 2 minutes, FYI.
You can keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, so so Franklin Park, right, is historically a landmark. It has always been high. For it to be low around that area is because of the removal of the trolleys and everything around this area. So we just have to be very careful when you're putting anything into that area, even the current connection, the Mattapan action plan down Blue Hill Ave, that's an issue. You're going to just basically, well, at least if you don't connect it back to Dudley, it needs to be connected back to Dudley. Now, the squares and streets, I've looked at all the maps, all the different areas. Literally, the areas identified by the squares and streets is exactly the highest areas that are, by the map, risk for displacement. I don't know how that's going to work because literally the most vulnerable people live in those communities, and that's the area that's going to be redeveloped. Rosendale Square is going to be there. They've put out the small action plan up to 12 floors in one area, right by the parking lot. That's going to, if you're a small community that needs money, you cannot. That's going to just basically the economic displacement. And then also I want to talk a little bit about, you're talking about building housing. That housing is for, are we designing the very communities that I come from out of the process? My communities need 4 or 5 bedroom houses. They don't need 2, 3 bedrooms, 1 in studio. So once you're doing that, you're literally designing us out before we get there. And then finally, the success metrics. I'm very, somehow I make this joke, no offense, but I say BPDA, they always forget the metrics when it's time to deliver, engineers that don't like numbers. But what I'm trying to say is that how many people are being displaced? How many people will be saved from displacement due to this plan? Those are the kind of numbers that are going to make us know whether we're just running in place or we're just, or we're doing it, just randomly. So I think that's all the time I have, but I really appreciate all the effort everybody's put in, and we're all partners, and we want all Bostonians, even the ones that are leaving, we want right to return, because once a Bostonian, always Bostonian. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marlon. You've given us a lot to think about, even through just sort of the removing of a case-by-case situation with each individual project. Does that help create investment or lack of investment if something is not case-by-case, and then there's sort of not that conversation at the community level? But very, very helpful, and thank you all for being here. I really appreciate, I know that I'm the closest counselor to City Hall, just in terms of distance, and I know how much it takes, to get community leaders here from other parts of the city. So I just really appreciate everything you're doing to be here, and just want to. We're going to move back to counselors' questions. Oh, yeah, they can go ahead if that's. Sorry, I just couldn't see them and they weren't on the list. Okay. Andrew, are you ready to speak? You have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Hey, how's it going? I just got promoted to panelist.
Oh, perfect. Okay, you can speak now. 2 minutes.
Great. Thank you. Andrew Murray, I'm also in Councilor Pepin's district. Housing costs and displacement are a top concern in Rosendale, just like they are everywhere else in Boston and in the region. Since we passed our current zoning code 15 years ago, which has essentially blocked all new housing development, rents have more than doubled because, again, the zoning code is blocking much needed housing. And this is actively displacing our neighbors. We need both market rate and subsidized housing. This is not a either or equation or choice. Rosendale residents understand this very well. That's why we are voicing support for squares and streets by a 2-to-1 margin of those in favor versus those opposed. We do still have some well-intentioned, but I would say misguided activists that want to stop the squares and streets from being voted into law in Rosendale and adopting the map. And that's going to do real harm and continue the displacement that's happening in our neighborhood currently. Housing is an essential good. We've made it artificially scarce. Boston's vacancy rate is dangerously low, pushing more people out into homelessness, forcing more people to move to outlying towns and suburbs. We have to remove the restrictive zoning barriers that are preventing local builders from providing essential homes. In terms of this anti-displacement policy, I fully support policies that help vulnerable residents. I think those are good. I think that policies that tax housing production are bad. You wouldn't tax a chicken farmer to solve an egg shortage. So I don't really know why we are taxing the people building homes. Lastly, I think the topic of architectural conservation districts have to be removed from the plan entirely. We've seen in Cambridge and other cities how these policies block desperately needed multifamily housing and actually worsen displacement instead of preventing it, which I think is the actual goal here. So again, it's time to fix our zoning in Rosendale and in all of Boston and the whole region, so we can keep our community growing and keep our neighbors intact. So thank you for the time and the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Okay, so we are going to go back to my colleagues. We're going to go in order of arrival. So Councilor Pepen, you're first. And you have, well, I think I'm going to do 4 minutes just because it's the second round. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to thank the District 5 residents for always showing up. I'm genuinely actually very proud that so many of you are here. So thanks for being here. Throughout the conversations and listening to my colleagues, I actually thought about something that Councilor Flynn mentioned, and it was about the money. And obviously, a lot of things have to do with money. And I know that when it comes to affordable housing and options that developers have, they have the opportunity to either build housing or they give money to the Affordable Housing Fund. Is there any way that there's wiggle room for us to be creative and say some of that money will be used to assist people that might be getting displaced, or not just for new home ownership opportunities, for new business opportunities? I don't know what the process is, so I'm asking you, like, is there a way for us to use that? But similar to how we are using the Boston Acquisition Fund.
So right now, inclusionary zoning and before it, IDP allowed for a developer to meet their obligations on-site, off-site, or to cash out. And we've always tried to use the cash in that particular neighborhood. One thing that we are seeing, we've had a few examples recently where a developer and a nonprofit have come together and said, we'd like to meet our obligation off-site because we really need to jumpstart our market rate development, but we'd like to help the nonprofit actually purchase existing tenanted housing. And if the housing is in very good shape, if the square footage is comparable, if it's something that we've been intrigued by, that we would actually be helping existing tenants, to your point, then make their unit permanently affordable and to stop displacement. So that's kind of an interesting idea, and staying within the existing zoning. What we don't do, though, is get resources from a developer and then use it for back rent or first and last, because it really, IDP or IZ is really about production of affordable housing and not so much about tenant stabilization and relief. We have other resources for that, not enough, but we have enough between the state programs and city programs to take care of most of the residents that call in need. So I think we can look at off-site being existing housing, but I wouldn't want to see it just in subsidizing existing residents.
Right, just an idea of being creative with what money we already have coming in. And another ideas that I've heard are like district improvement financing that's used in other parts of different municipalities. That's an idea that's been thrown out in my district as well. So I don't know if that's something we've considered, but I do want to shift over. I only have 4 minutes. I want to shift over to a business question for Chief Shaganadu. So in Hyde Park, we are currently seeing a beautiful development, 1201 River Street. It's a senior-friendly housing, 55 plus, all affordable. But it came at the cost of losing 3 business storefronts in Cleary Square, to the point of Scott Beatty. How can we ensure that, luckily we are getting 1 commercial space back, but how can we ensure that in the future, for any future potential development in Cleary Square or any square in our city, we can try to prevent that, or tell the developer, hey, there's 3 businesses here, how can we make sure we bring those back?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, you've got 6 members of District 5 here in the chamber, and as someone that lives right down the street from Cleary Square, I remember when this proposal was accepted in 2022, and the advocacy of the residents who are here around how we support these businesses, although it's bringing needed senior housing into the district. The Article 80 disclosure that I think was mentioned by Devin and that you find in the report would be one of the ways that we help to prevent something like that. So understanding exactly what the displacement is going to be, and then, kind of what's outlined. So, ensuring that we're working with the developer to keep them there, right? The right to remain, but if not possible, then they are part of the solution of finding other spaces for them to be in the immediate vicinity. And, as I mentioned to your first question today on what do we do now, before this is put into action, offline we are always negotiating with developers and landlords to be helpful in that process.
Thank you. And I know my time is up, but I just do want to say thank you to the work that the Office of Small Business does. I do want to give a quick shout out to Theanne Simpson, who is the head of Hyde Park Main Streets, and just did do an amazing job out there. We're very lucky to have some local businesses in my district.
That's right.
So thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor Pepen. Councilor Murphy?
And thank you to the public testimony. It's always good to hear from the residents directly. And I know many residents have been emailing and calling, so I'm always appreciative when they are engaged. A question for you, Sagun. We've had conversations like with the libraries and talking about whether or not we want some of our renovations or new builds having housing above libraries and other housing options when we're approving projects. I mean, those are obviously city-owned assets. Have there been conversations in the business district if they're going to maybe build up and build housing, if there would be some incentives for business owners to do that?
Well, I think the Squares and Streets plan might be the avenue that we're talking about, building on top of commercial properties. And certainly, when we're talking with, anecdotally, there are, one-story buildings across the city that are purely commercial. And some of the folks who come to us and say, hey, we would love your support in, like, we want to own the building, right? Because most of these properties are not owned by the small business owners, and we want them to own it. And I encourage them all the time to think about building housing on top of those spaces, and then building affordable housing and speaking with housing and directing them that way as ways to
It's
both
like
acquire
Green
the
Hills
property.
in my neighborhood.
What was that?
Green Hills in my neighborhood got that approved, where it's a one-story bakery and they want to put housing above.
Right.
I mean, mixed emotions, obviously, it always is in this conversation, but do you see others that aren't part of a Squares and Street neighborhood but are asking for those types of approvals when it comes to the zoning board?
Well, first I'll say I would love to live on top of a bakery to wake up every morning, just to say. I will say that the opportunity is there. Some people don't even think about it, right? Because they're very focused on, like, I want to own this thing that I might be in or that I know is over there, which is why we're always encouraging folks to think outside of the box and like, well, there's only 1 or 2 stories. Would you build up? And then funneling them towards housing. So I think for me, in answer to your question in a very long way, is to say that, yes, there have been folks that reach out, but on the other side, it's getting people to think of that opportunity.
Right. Awesome, thank you. No other questions. Just know this conversation will continue, but thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Councilor Murphy. Next, we're going to go to Councilor Rowell.
Thank you, Chair. And also thank you to the residents that came and testified. I think this is a question for Devin. I was going to try to find your title, but I couldn't find it in time. Deputy Chief Quirk. We constantly hear about, Boston doesn't produce enough housing. Where do we rank in terms of housing production last year or the year before?
That's a great question. I don't have in front of me comparative statistics for other cities, but I've seen the national trends in terms of housing production. And as you probably know, and I think many in the audience know, housing production is down across the United States.
Right.
And significantly down from a high in 2020, 2022. That same trend exists in Boston. We peaked in our housing production around 2022 in terms of units coming online and fallen off since, and it has everything to do with the macroeconomic conditions and interest rates and returns of capital increasing. So our overall production, while we are still producing housing, we still produced over 2,000 units of market-rate housing last year, it's not what it once was.
Yeah, I did not feel like 4 minutes.
No, I don't know. I started it over. Just do what
Okay.
you need to do.
And then going back to Squares and Streets and Article 80, when we're talking about having these in neighborhoods on the map are showing a high rate of displacement, are we thinking of another layer, right? Because the idea is to make everything as of right, and we know the devils are in the details when it comes to these projects. Are we thinking of another layer, knowing that it's in a high displacement area?
Yeah, that I was struck by Marlon's comments about historically disinvested communities through intentionally racist policies that pulled the investment away from neighborhoods, and what do we do as a community as we want to reinvest in those neighborhoods? Because I think doing nothing is not an option. And we're all here concerned about displacement, not because we just think it's a forward-looking thing, but because it is happening in our communities already and has already happened. So doing nothing is certainly not an option. Right. And part of what Squares and Streets and all of our rezoning efforts represent is predictability for the future. So I think just to take an option off the table, what we can't do is say, oh, in neighborhoods where there is a high risk of displacement, we're not going to do rezoning. Those neighborhoods don't get a quality zoning code. They need to remain in the unenforceable, unpredictable zoning code we have today. That's not an acceptable answer. So we have to move forward, and we have to work through these trade-off solutions, and we know that Boston needs to grow. So there needs supply, and production needs to be part of the answer, along with all the outside the market solutions that this report represents, along with an intentional focus on displacement risk. So there is no silver bullet solution to that. That is a conversation that needs to be done in communities around the zoning and around each project, and prioritizing the mitigation and community benefits that come from it. But we have to move forward through it. If we stop, it will not solve the problem.
Right. But would the BPDA be open to another layer, knowing that these areas have high displacement?
And anything that we can do that will help Bostonians, residents, and business owners that exist in our communities today stay there, we are open for doing. We're open to exploring. That's what this report represents. And at the same time, we remain very committed to growing the city. So we just have to balance these two concerns as best as possible.
All right. And Marlon was on point, right? A lot of the policies, definitely were targeted and have harmed certain communities. And I think we definitely need to be, sensitive to that and make sure that we're doing, everything to be targeted, and making sure that we're bringing communities along in this conversation, opposed to continuing, right, that harm that is done. I think my last question is, I know my team had one question they wanted me to ask. I think this is for Chief Dillon. Can you clarify the number and status of vacant land parcels that the city currently owns?
Yeah, I can. I don't have it in front of me, but I'll get it to you. It's hovered around 1,000, but it always bears, or I need to say again, that includes like 250 in the Grove in West Roxbury. It includes a lot of small parcels in Highland Park. It includes lots and lots of parcels that are like, the size of a postage stamp next to someone's house. So there's not a lot of buildable parcels left, and certainly working with you and others in this room, we're putting a lot of the remaining decent parcels out, but I'll get you a full report on that, Counselor.
And this is the last one. Sorry,
Yeah, go
Chair.
ahead.
We saw in the city code, chapter 10, -7. It's a neighborhood impact commission. What is the current status and structure of the neighborhood impact commission?
I'll have to look into that one, Counselor. I'm not familiar with that one offhand. I don't know if you are, Sheila or Shiga. No. But we'll look into it and get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor Rell. Next, we'll go to Councilor Mejia, who is the second sponsor. And just wanted to say, I think usually I don't like using the timer. The timer is just to give you an idea of like how long you're going. I really do want everyone to flesh out their comments. So do what you need to do and get your questions answered. And we will allow for a third round if anyone wants one. Okay, go ahead, Councilor Mejia.
Thank you, Chair. So I am curious, I've really been thinking about this housing crisis that we're in. And, I often talk about the fact that when I was growing up here in the city of Boston, I bounced from place to place because my mom and I could not stay in one place long enough to make friends because we just couldn't. And that has an impact also on how I showed up in school. Right? So all of these things are interconnected, right? And so this is, I'm going to keep going back to the whole child, to the whole person, to the whole spectrum here. Like, I think I'd like to add Health and Human Services and the Boston Public Health Commission to your chief of coordinated services, because they also are probably going to interface with folks who are fearing their lives and a fear of displacement. So maybe we'll all need some therapy as a result of that. So bring them on into this conversation. But going back to this whole, and I grew up here during the height of the busing era when a lot of our neighbors were burning down their homes because they didn't want us to live here. So there's a lot of historical perspective when we're talking about displacement and we're talking about gentrification and we're talking about everything. So I just really want, for folks who don't understand this conversation, it's really helpful for those folks who are tuning in to really understand the impact that we're trying to make here with this action plan and kind of how that's going to repair some of that harm. So just kind of give people a little bit of overview around that. And one of the things that I continue to find myself asking is affordable to who? Who are we building for? Right? So this always gets lost in these conversations because we have the AMI, which is set by the federal government, right? Chief Dillon?
Yes, that is correct.
But we have an opportunity to be bolder and bigger. And I'm just curious what appetite, if any, exists for us to consider regional AMI, thresholds. Like, for instance, if you live in Mattapan or Dorchester, the area median income is very different than if you live in Back Bay or Beacon Hill or now even Mission Hill at this point, considering what Councilor Durkin recently just shared. And so even looking at it from Boston, even that is not equitable. And so I'm just curious, how are we really grappling with that? And is that here in the action plan?
It's not an action plan. It's affordable to whom is like the question we hear most when we go out and we're talking about a particular affordable housing development. And what's the most troubling about our AMI points or AMI levels is that it really picks up a lot of the very wealthy, suburban towns that are adjacent to Boston. So we've been working very, very hard to not have everything pegged to 60, 80, 100. And really when projects come in, we're asking them to provide us a range of AMIs or rent levels, and those that are also much lower. Recently, too, we decreased the AMIs for inclusionary zoning, as you know, and there's now an average of 60 versus 70. So we have been recognizing that a lot of Boston residents can't afford affordable housing, right? And so that sits with us. We would be bolder, to use your phrase, if there were additional resources. And I say that because it costs so much to operate a unit of affordable housing, right? Somewhere between $12,000 and $15,000 a year per unit. The rents have to be able to cover that unless you've got a project-based subsidy. It's just real estate finance. So we find ourselves sometimes pushing the affordability levels as low as they can go and still be financially feasible. That is an inadequate answer to your question and to what we want to do. Sometimes it's just a financial necessity given the lack of resources from our federal government and having vouchers that we can put into these developments. But your point is very well taken, and we have been really trying to drive them down or have a range of incomes per affordable housing developments that can speak to folks that are living in that neighborhood now.
All right.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah, so Devin, you're going to say something because I'm going to say something after you say something. Is that okay, Chair?
Yes,
okay,
of course.
Great, thanks.
I completely agree with everything Chief Dillon just said. I just wanted to add in one more point that I think sometimes gets lost in the AMI conversation. So I think Sheila very appropriately pointed out that, hey, when we take this really broad view of Boston, it sweeps in all these wealthy suburbs and makes the AMI artificially high. And then if you look at a hyper-local way of calculating AMI, you might yield the wrong result as well. There are census tracts in South Boston where the AMI is extremely low. It's not because housing is so affordable in South Boston. It's because there are some census tracts that are 100% BHA public housing, and by definition, the people who live in those units are lower income. So that AMI is not that really helpful to you either when you're prescribing targets for new construction, because actually those individuals living in public housing are already housed in an environment that's safe from displacement, at least from economic displacement. So just saying we should build to the neighborhood AMI is probably not enough either, because it doesn't account for how much affordable housing exists in the neighborhood. A neighborhood like Roxbury has 50% affordable housing, so there's a lot of people there who are living in income-restricted units that are outside of the market. Mm-hmm. In a neighborhood like West Roxbury, it might have much higher AMI, but it's probably more accurate to the needs of the neighborhood because there isn't a lot of affordable housing there. So there's a lot of data inputs into this that can confound that variable. To that extent, I just want to say I think Sheila has the right answer. AMI is not what we should be talking about. That kind of leads people astray. We're having the wrong debate. We should be talking about what rent levels we want to see in new construction. And
how's that different? Because I think the rent is tied to the AMI, right?
That's ultimately a formula behind the scenes, right?
Because I want to make sure that I'm not making up scenarios in my head. That's how you all determine what the rents are going to be, right? Based on the AMI, right?
I think you can also do it the other way. You can say,
do you do it the other way?
If you wanted to say we wanted to target a $2,000 rent for this income restricted unit, you can then back into what AMI level that is.
All right. Thank you for that. I appreciate the education. I'm curious, and we recently passed through this council the $110 million accelerator fund. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And I was really curious about the equity piece of it. But, we have all of this money and we are investing in building and all of this, but I'm just curious, I have seen in this iteration of this particular council opportunities where we have utilized funding in ways to offset or to do creative things. Very similar to that $110 million, maybe some set-asides could have been put aside to stabilize the rent for some folks who are rent burdened, right? Or no? Because it was an appropriation, correct?
$50 million of it is going to the BHA for the One Charlestown redevelopment.
Yeah, that I know, but I'm just talking about other stuff, right?
Yeah. The nature of that tool is a equity investment into market rate housing production. But I take your point. To Sheila's point, it all comes down to money, right?
Right. So that's what I'm trying to say. That it all comes down to money, and where we invest and how we decide to utilize our dollars. If we're talking about anti-displacement, this is an appropriate space to discuss how we can be utilizing our free cash to help support folks who are rent burdened. Mm-hmm. Because we've done it for development, why can't we do it to keep people here, is my question.
Well, I guess I have two answers to that. One is the program itself, by addressing housing production, I do think is important. Production is one of the 4 Ps in the report to help the people that we want to serve. So it is addressing keeping people here by creating housing that is not going to otherwise be created, and that has an inclusionary component. And then also, second answer to that question is, of course, the budget season is coming up, and I'm sure Sheila and everyone else here will have numerous proposals around how we can expand some of these programs.
No, and I appreciate that. I know the budget season is a very beautiful time in our lives here on the council. And I'm sure we'll have lots of great debate in terms of how we're going to meet the financial crisis that we are going to experience as a result of what's happening on the national landscape. And so I want to be realistic about that, because what's going to happen, at least, having survived the last round when that administration was here, and doing a lot of COVID crisis response work in vulnerable communities, I already have a sense of what we can anticipate. And because of that, I also know we're not going to get ARPA funding and blessings sent our way. In fact, I think we're going to get curses. And so with that, right, I really want us to think about how we're going to help support our most vulnerable residents. I know we're here to talk about anti-displacement in this action plan, but if we're really looking at how we can set ourselves up for success, I think that there is a real conversation for us to have around subsidizing and supporting our most vulnerable our most resilient, because we're not vulnerable, we're resilient, because God knows the things that we have survived, but here we are still standing. And so, Sheila, I'm looking to you in particular, right? Because there's attacks on immigration, trans housing. I mean, there's everything that you could possibly imagine. And so I'm just curious, those are folks who are also living in crisis right now. And so what does that look like as we continue to have these conversations around anti-displacement?
Sure. So I too am worried about what the next 4 years hold for Boston and other major cities, and I think we're just going to have to work very, very closely and smart and in a very smart way to make sure that our residents, our most vulnerable residents, don't suffer any more than they already have. When I think about displacement and what we're building and all of it, there are a lot of, because of all of our work, there is a lot of affordable housing in the city. Affordable, income restricted, I should say, income restricted housing. And people are living full and productive lives in those housing units. And then there's homeowners, and then there's students, and then there's people that have high incomes that can afford the market rate. And then there's a subset of people that are low income and are very, very much at risk. And I think we need to, we do understand that population, but that's where I think our energy, especially over the next 4 years, really has to go. Like, those folks are in very precarious situations, and their incomes are not what they need to be to survive in Boston. And what are we doing to make sure that we're targeting them? And if the resources get scarce or scarcer than they are, making sure that they are okay.
Right, because Chair, do you mind one more?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Because what I have seen in my time inside this situation is that we have lost a lot of residents. I believe there was 28% of Black folks. I'm not sure what the number was. Do you remember what the number was?
I don't. I do remember the statistic. The Globe had a story on it about it. It was a lot. Yes. Yeah.
And so there is this illusion, I'll just say, I don't know if it's true or not, I can't confirm what is true and what is not these days, but I'm just curious, like it just feels like low-income people, particularly people of color, are being displaced at an alarming rate here in the city of Boston. And it's become a city of haves and have-nots, right? And it's just been a long time coming. It's no result of this particular administration, and I want to be clear about that. It has just been the signs of the times that we are operating in. And so I want to be clear on that, right? So don't get anybody twisted. This is not about this particular administration. This is just the attacks on people who are poor. And historically, we are the ones that always have to pack up and go find somewhere else to stay, because people who have money can live anywhere that they want. There's a privilege there. And I think that when we're thinking about anti-displacement action plans and all of these conversations, I feel like there's a disconnect here. And I can never name it, because I feel like I'm struggling between these two worlds now that I find myself in, but there is a real layer of, like the middle class, we're just perpetuating that even further. And I think that at some point, and I've said this in other spaces, is that, what if there was a displacement tax, right? For every development project where we know we're going to displace X amount of people, then that tax, very similar to linkage, gets put on the folks who are making the money for building to live here in the city of Boston and to build in the city of Boston. There are folks that we can potentially target and hold accountable who are displacing us. And I just don't know who that is, but I feel like there is an opportunity for us somebody has to assume responsibility for the displacement of the people who live here. And I just don't know who that is. We can't, I look at Northeastern, I look at BU, I look at Harvard, I look at MIT, I look at all of these, I look at Fidelity, I look at, I'm gonna call out some, businesses. I look at all of these people who are benefiting off of the people who are the little guys and girls. And we're having a conversation about anti-displacement, but where in this toolkit is that accountability factor? Who are those folks? Because they are part of the problem. Who are they? And what can we do to engage them in this conversation? Are they listed here? Are they here? Who do I have to go talk to? Because somebody needs to be responsible for displacing the people who live here in the city of Boston. So I'd like to know who that is so that we can map quest our way there. Who is it?
Councilor Mejia, was that rhetorical?
No,
or
that is
okay.
I need to know who I need to talk to.
No, because it also sounded good rhetorically too.
I don't even know what the rhetorical.
Yeah.
It's a question like that I have, and I don't know if it's because it's a illegitimate question. It's not. I don't know if it's not. Well, I could say it another way. I just need to know.
Yeah,
who.
I can answer that question in two ways.
Thank you.
The first is when it comes to actual developments directly displacing actual commercial residents and commercial tenants and residents. The displacement disclosure we'll put into place in Article 80 will give you that data around who those developers actually are, who those owners actually are. So that is empirical data we will develop as a result of implementing.
So we don't have that information yet.
No,
because we have a lot of LLCs and people who don't even live in the city, let alone in this country, are buying up blocks.
Yeah.
And so there is. Look, I feel like there is someone benefiting here.
Yeah.
And so so do we know about these LLCs? These folks who are operating under multiple licenses or corporations and buying up the block? Who are they?
We have done some initial research into this displacement as a result of Article 80 projects in the past several years. So we have some of that data to bring to the table. As it turns out, a lot of the larger scale development is not the most directly responsible for direct displacement. It tends to be more the smaller infill development.
But those folks are buying up Fenway and buying up blocks and renting those apartments to college students. Not that I have any issues with college students. I want to say that for the record. They all need a place to live too, but those are the folks, and I'm not talking about builders and big, I'm talking about getting into the weeds of the displacement, because folks who live in Austin and Brighton, they're families. They want to be able to stay in the city too. Yeah. But when LLCs are buying up blocks and then renting apartments for $4,000, they're driving up rents for everybody who lives around the neighborhood. And so that is part of the anti-displacement conversation. And I'm curious if it's outlined in this document or this one.
I have a different way to answer your question, which is to say that in terms of who to hold accountable, we're putting out this plan so that you can hold us accountable to implementing this plan. We have this is the first time the city has ever had an anti-displacement plan. It's something that we've been talking about since I joined the city 15 years ago. It's something we've been talking about the entire time. We've never actually had a full-throated response. This is what the city is going to do collectively across cabinets, and this represents our administration saying we are all work on this together. We have a plan to move forward. So in terms of who to call down and ask how's this going, it's us, and that's what we're committing to doing.
And who are you calling?
Councilor Mejia, I had a couple questions.
Oh, you did? Okay, I can wait for my third round.
Could I just say
Yeah,
one
go
thing?
ahead.
So I think your question's a very good one, and you're right. There's a lot of smaller, larger, there's a lot of companies right now buying existing rental housing stock in the city, and that's been going on especially for the last five or so years, and they've become even, not, some of them are local and some of them are now very national. It's happening in every city. We track eviction data, but, so we know who's bringing eviction action because we're reaching out to the people that are being evicted. So we have that data, and we collect it now in a very good way, a very solid way. What you don't have, Counselor, is if as two seniors are living in a two-family in, you name it, Mattapan, and they get a notice from a new owner that their rent is being doubled, and they feel like they've got to leave, and they probably do eventually. We don't have that data. There's no way, and it drives us crazy too, there's no way of getting that data to know that company X or LLC has doubled the rent of two seniors, and now they own this property and they're going to double the rent. That data set doesn't exist because there's no recording of it anywhere. So I just want to put that out there. I think that's a scenario that you feel, that I feel, it's the calls we get, but we don't have a good, there's no data source for that.
So that we're going to include that, right?
There's no way to collect it because they leave. They just leave. They leave the city. They go to a different part of the city. We don't get that data. So I too, I just want to share your frustration because I would love to be able to do that and meet with them. And now if we hear something and we start seeing a trend, we're on it, right? We really are on it. We hold people accountable if we know about it.
Thank you, Counselor.
No,
I do appreciate the
thank you
indulgence.
so much.
I'll wait for my third round. Thank you.
No, honestly, so many of your questions and comments were just like making me realize exactly what I wanted to talk about. So thank you so much. So one thing I wanted to bring up is this has come to me from people who work with youth in our neighborhoods. There are a lot of youth workers that work for the city. The mayor has expanded that program so that like it's a jobs guarantee. A lot of people have talked about how they've gotten a letter after their child has made $1,500 that they need to recertify, and that their housing, because of Section 8 and their affordable housing, it's shown that there's a new person making income in their, and that has terrified the families. And we have a situation where kids that would benefit from doing youth jobs in the summer are refusing to give their social security number, refusing to get paid. They want the experience, but they're not willing to accept the pay. I know that there's not much we can do on the Section 8 part of this, but do you think it's a good idea for us to explore as a city council, making sure that at least for BPDA, affordable housing, that we are exempting exempting youth minors from being their income being counted towards the family's rent share? Or sorry, because basically what's happening is because they put their social security number in, there's a notification to someone that there's new income in the household. And then on top of that, I have this idea. I've heard from a lot of constituents who get really anxious around when they have to recertify for affordable housing, and I do think that's leading to some displacement. People don't fill out their paperwork, and obviously, oftentimes they have to fill it out with the city, and they have to fill it out with Section 8, and so there's multiple layers to this, and obviously we can't fix things at the federal government. Would the city consider making that every 2 years and not every year for affordable housing?
So when you mentioned the piece about youth, something was, and I wish Kenzie was here, there was something in the back of my mind saying it wasn't, that if you're under 18, your income was not part of the household calculation. And my AI overview is saying the same thing, but I want to get it, I want to give you chapter and verse on that. I think that is the case, but I want to make sure.
And this is coming from John Jackson, who has been at the Tobin for 37 years. He's actually had a lot of families like refuse to participate in youth jobs.
If I'm correct, and I do want to do some research on it, it may just be misinformation too, or they get a notice and they need to explain it, which is, you know, a drag in and of itself. But I'd like to get that information, and if I'm accurate, then we need to get that information out to families.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess the fact that John Jackson, who does such great work at the Tobin, would even be concerned about and spend time writing letters to say this person no longer works here. He's having to, every year, write letters to say that person no longer works here. So I think that that should be part of the program in general, and I know that's not, but again, it's like a worry that has come to me with families.
You are raising, oftentimes we're working with individuals or families that are getting evicted because they haven't done their income certifications. And it's just, it's very, very frustrating. They're really, and probably we're going to see an increase in that too, especially as people are giving over information and they're scared of government. I mean, the mayor talks about this a lot, that government should be accessible and you should feel safe coming forward, but people are feeling less and less safe. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to maybe have the BHA and Metro Housing come and talk about certifications and what we can do to ease the pain with them.
Yeah, and not even, I'm not saying this in any negative way, but I moved here and I was making $47,000 when I moved here. And I didn't even know that affordable housing was accessible to me. And I think a lot of times there's been multiple stories about this, but it ends up being like people who are in the know, providing all the right documents, knowing how it all works. And this is not that we aren't doing enough or Metro Housing isn't doing enough, but I do think the city could do more to make sure that the pool of people applying to access affordable housing is actually representative of the population, because it's happened again and again where there are more people that work in this building living in affordable housing than anywhere else, and that's fine. They're making the right amount of money. They are absolutely certified. They're doing everything they can. And they obviously are people, oftentimes to certify that you are making a certain amount of money, you have to have it together. You've got to know when to provide your bank account. You've got to do all of these steps. And so I get that requires a certain amount of togetherness, that often people who access it have a job, know how to navigate all of this stuff. But I do think we could be doing more, and whether that's tutorials or meetings or just sort of getting people in the know, because I know that when I made $47,000, I did not know I was eligible for affordable housing. So
I agree with you. I think sometimes the folks that are most represented in our lotteries are folks that are right now securely housed, and they have their paperwork, they have a job, they have actually time on the weekends, they're not working 2 and 3 jobs, they have time on the weekends to actually put the applications together, et cetera. I just want to call out in the plan, we are really exploring and very close to doing, setting aside units in the lottery for folks that are the most rent burdened, versus someone who may be living with their parents and they're okay right now, but really acknowledging that folks that are the most in need really do need a percentage of these units as they come online. But I also, we're doing more workshops about how to apply for housing throughout the city, like what's available, Metro List, demystifying lotteries, and really being out there more and more. And the team at MOH is doing a good job, and the response has been really good, but always more to do.
Absolutely. And I think that's a lot of what we deal with in government, is people that are very connected know when grant money is appearing. They know when housing lotteries and how to get through it. And we do need to be doing more to make sure that every single person has access to the same tools. And that means actually focusing on populations that we don't have their email. And we need to figure out like sort of grassroots ways to get involved. I did want to bring up the inclusionary zoning requirements. Obviously, there's been a conversation happening about whether our IDP percentage is too high. There's also been a conversation happening about whether, why housing isn't getting built right now. And I think a lot of us have the answer to that question. It's very simple. Interest rates are high, the cost of construction is high, the cost of materials is high, the cost of labor is high, and the cost of the plot of land is also high. So, but there is an analysis from UCLA from April 2024 that shows that overly aggressive IZ requirements slow housing production. A lot of the housing development that have not been built, we know were 12%, 13%, 15%, 17%, not actually 20% where we are now. But I guess just sort of curious if there's been what the conversation at the city is at this moment. And obviously I have this idea that I have brought to Kairos Shen at our last hearing about streamlining 121A agreements for residential approvals over 100 units. And obviously, we know that 121A agreements are special tax agreements, so I'm not setting what that special tax agreement is, but I do believe that should be something that the Ombudsman is working on, which I know he does a great job. But I think that, for me, the goal there's 8 projects that are approved in District 8, over 100 units of housing approved, that would equal 1,500 units of housing if we could get them built. Obviously, those examples that I'm talking about were approved at a myriad of inclusionary zoning percentages. So I don't think the reason that we're not having things built is necessarily the IZ percentage, but because there is this conversation happening at the citywide, there's this discourse going on, I was just curious sort of what everyone's thoughts are about that.
You're absolutely right, Councilor. So there, just to repeat what you just said, there are over 20,000 units of housing that have been approved to the BPDA board. That means there are housing that we want to see built that's earned our stamp of approval that are not yet in construction. They range the full gamut of affordability from 13% and below, because some of them have been around for a very long time, to 17% plus the voucher requirement we have today. So it is not the inclusionary zoning requirement that is the one thing that is preventing housing construction in Boston, because if so, those units would be going into construction.
Yeah, if so, the 13%
right,
inclusionary zoning one would be built right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that, but that said, every project has unique financial circumstances, and to repeat something that Chief Shen said in a City Council hearing last week, we are absolutely willing to have a discussion with any individual owner about the obstacles that they're facing and what tools exist in the city's portfolio to move housing ahead. I don't think we're in the fiscal environment where we want to have a massive tax expenditure to incentivize housing, but if there's a moderate tax expenditure for a particular project and get into construction, that's a conversation worth having, and then we can have a broader discussion about it.
I don't know. Would it be absolutely crazy if I invited the 8 developers from these 8 projects that could build 1,500 units of housing to a Zoom call with Chief Shen and the Ombudsman, and we just got everyone to the table and said, anyone want to move on any of these projects right now?
I think you'd find that you'd have 8 different financial circumstances across those 8 projects, and some of them might be things that we could solve, and some of those would be things we couldn't. So I think it's probably better to have an individual conversation with each of them, but it's a conversation worth having.
I think I'm just coming for the Ombudsman's job, so apologize. Apologize for that. Okay, so I did want to just, Chief Idowu, programs such as the Space Grant Program have been promising tools on building small business economic development and inclusive practices within the city that really try to expand. It's obviously a model. I know Congresswoman Presley shared that this was a model in one of the congressional hearings about how ARPA money could be spent. Also, as the chair of COVID-19 recovery, it's just been amazing to see some of the businesses that have been invested in District 8 and also businesses that really, like Danny's Queer Bar and the Hummus Shop and places that I don't know if they'd be open or be as successful without that program. What are we going to do now that we don't have any ARPA money, now that it feels like just sort of there's no Hail Mary coming from the federal government to expand or even just keep pace with what we've been doing? Is there any sort of interesting modeling or anything that we can do to continue that program?
Absolutely. So there's two things that's happening right now. One is that we're in the period of evaluation. So, I mean, we know the top line statistics, 91 businesses supported, across the city, and by the end of them all opening, 800 new or existing jobs that are being added to our economy. And they're spread out all across the city, which is great. As you mentioned, your district, downtown, Seaport, Back Bay, Roxbury, Mattapan. However, we want to kind of dig deeper and understand exactly what that impact is. And, most of them have opened their spaces, others have not. So we want to give ourselves time to evaluate that true success of this program beyond the top line statistics. At the same time, we're talking with folks who want to be supportive financially. And so it's just about, what those specifics are, dollar amounts, et cetera. But again, like right now, we're working with Harvard Kennedy School and a couple other firms in the city to do a deeper analysis so that when we go out fully to fundraise, at the national level, state level, we're providing whatever data folks are looking for.
Thank you. And I just want to, I know I'm out of time, way out of time, and I know Councilor Pepin needs to go, and then I know Councilor Mejia has some additional questions too. We need to ban algorithmic price setting in the city of Boston. I have one developer or owner in our district that's using it. They've talked about how it's being used, and essentially what they're doing is they're setting your first rent based on the properties nearby, and then once you know that you can afford this rent, you're at $2,300 because you're like, oh my gosh, what a steal. I'm gonna move to this building. But what they're doing is they're just setting their prices competitive with the nearby. And then the next year, when you're all moved in, all your picture frames are hung up, your TV is mounted, you love where you live, you've got in-unit laundry, you love it so much, $500 rent increase. It's disgusting. I can't believe that we haven't done anything about it yet. I did file a hearing order both years, but we haven't been able to. Does the city have an official position on algorithmic price setting?
Yeah, I mean, and first of all, thank you for mentioning that. One of the things that we made, so first to say the space program did more than just give a check, right? $200,000, everyone wants it, but we didn't want to just do that and then leave people out there by themselves. So all the TA that we provided, one of the things we included was negotiation with the landlord, because what I didn't want to do is say, here business, $200,000 check to build out costs and paying rent, and the landlord goes, oh, you have a check for $200,000, your rent is $200,000 over the next 3 years of your lease. And so exactly that. I mean, I'd love to talk more and learn more about the algorithm, how folks are using that.
And I think it's mostly not for commercial spaces, it's for residential. It could come to commercial spaces. It may exist in commercial spaces, and I don't know that yet.
Well, but to your point,
yeah.
We also see, Chief Dillon talked earlier about, what the mayor's been pushing for on rent stabilization and how that will be impactful for residents, but we're seeing the same thing happen to commercial tenants right now. You read about it in Councilor Braden's district, Twin Donuts, where the landlord just randomly, over the last year, increased the rent by X amount. So these are all things that we need to look at on both ends, because it's not just impacting residential tenants, it's impacting our small businesses as well.
Thank you. And I do want to just thank the Attorney General. She is on a lawsuit about this, and I know that Equity Residential, which is in my district, is listed as part of that lawsuit, which is what tipped me off. But a constituent actually came to me thinking that they were the victim of algorithmic price setting because they chose their rent at a certain rate, and then suddenly it was about what everything nearby was, so Chief Dillon?
No, just that. I said, wait a minute, I thought there was a state legislation that was filed, but it was the AG joining the Justice Department in suing. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with that. But I think it's a practice that, in my opinion, shouldn't be allowed in the city or the state. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with this lawsuit, and we should follow it very closely.
And do you think it's legally possible for us to ban it like we have with facial surveillance?
I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I'm asking a bunch of,
wait,
you're a lawyer, aren't you? He seems like a lawyer sometimes. Okay, so next we'll go to Councilor Pepin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I promise I have only 2 more questions. My first question was triggered by just some other conversations, and it is about vacant units that currently exist in the city of Boston. I went on doing some research myself, talking to some property owners of bigger developments in the city that have numerous units that are vacant. So I wanted to know what programs are in place to kind of incentivize, obviously maybe more expensive units to become available to maybe some working class families, to see what programs are out there to help with that. And then I'll just ask my second question now so that I could get it out of the way. A lot of businesses in this city are tied to certain cultures. Just, I going to Jamaican Plain with my family, Center Street was Dominican Center, and right now it doesn't look the same as it did 20 years ago. I'm facing the same thing right now in Mattapan and Hyde Park, where obviously there's a large Caribbean community there, specifically the Haitian community, where a lot of businesses are owned by folks from those parts of the world, but they could come to the case where a lot of those folks may not be able to live there in the next few years or in the next decade or two. So I wanted to know, how does the city foresee the maintenance of these cultural economic districts? Maybe that's a question for Chief here, so that not only our cultural districts are thriving, but also the people that are identified of that culture can also continue to call those places home. So I'll leave it at that.
So we can just comment about the vacant units. So we are interested in working with any landlord that has vacant units that may want to rent to families or individuals that have vouchers, either federal vouchers, state vouchers, city vouchers. And we do work with many of private landlords, but usually they're smaller landlords that own properties in the neighborhoods, not necessarily the owners of downtown properties. But if you come across any owners that might want to talk, I mean, that would be great, because we often have people really good, really good credit, good landlord history with a voucher that want to live in a particular neighborhood because their children go to school there, or their connections are there. So we would love to be able to work with that particular landlord. I can't imagine if a landlord has a lot of vacancies. To me, maybe their rent is too high and they need to bring their rent down. And that I would always suggest that, right? Because that's the idea. You build housing, you get a little bit too much of a vacancy, and rents come down. There have been times where there's some cities, but the only city that I know really of is in Vancouver, that has fees, or fines, I should say, if a landlord has vacant units. They're very hard to manage because, in Boston you have 300,000 units, and you have to have landlords certify every single year that their unit is being occupied, and then you have to set a fine structure, et cetera. So very, very complicated programs. I would rather instead just work with them to get those units filled.
But we already do have, you already have to pay a fee when you're reoccupying like a unit. Every year. I think for students it's on September 1, but for everyone else it's a different time of year, and that's actually in the municipal code. So maybe we could just tack something onto that. I was actually thinking about touching that, so that would be interesting.
In terms of the cultural district question, I don't know all that goes into creating cultural districts, but we are certainly open to, for instance, Mattapan there should be some cultural designation there, just given the types of businesses that are there. So happy to explore that. I will follow up with our interim chief, Kenny, for Arts and Culture on what that takes. I know there's a separate conversation being led by Yvonne with Lawyers for Civil Rights about East Boston, going after a cultural district, and we are fully behind that and with him in the group. And I'll just say the importance of it is we care a lot about local tourism. Now, we haven't chased after this just yet because I want to think about how to word it. And even though I'm saying this now on the record, not trying to scare anyone who's here, but like, for instance, there should be a lodging space in every neighborhood. And I used to say hotel, but then that freaked everybody out. I don't want no Hilton in every neighborhood, but just to say that there should be some type of place that tourists are able to stay, because that's what guarantees that there's going to be foot traffic out there, right? So we talked about this for NAACP. Everyone was saying, we want to see people go to Mattapan. But you've been to conferences. Nobody is getting in a car to travel 45 minutes down Blue Hill Ave to get to another neighborhood just to check out what's going on. But if you've got a place for people to stay and there are things there for people to do, they'll go out there. So just to say cultural designation really helps with that. In terms of how we help people stay though too, there's the marketing that we need to do of the neighborhoods, because at the end, all these questions about how we prevent displacement of small businesses, it's about foot traffic, it's about consumer spending. Doesn't matter how many grants we put out there, how much technical assistance we provide. If people aren't coming to the business, you're not generating revenue, you can't stick around, right? So our whole focus is how do we help them make more money through people supporting them in person, and that's what a lot of our resources have been geared toward. Hyde Park, Mattapan, we make sure language appropriate services are provided. Alicia and team have been pouring resources, educating people along the way to the points that have been made about people who are in the know are the ones who participate. We want as many people as possible to be in the know. And so that's why Restore projects are finally going through, why grants, when we're here for the budget, we show how it's not downtown that's getting them, it's not North End, it's Mattapan, Roxbury, Eastie, JP, because we're out there, delivering this information. So anyway, just to say, great question, we're with you, and I will learn more about the process for cultural districts, because there should be many more of them across the city. I hope I'm not standing in the way of anyone by saying that. But.
Well, I'll just add that the last cultural district that was created was Little Saigon, and that was actually pushing from then Councilor Michelle Wu. So it's just interesting, and that was really a community coalition of people who really did the work, and it was people in the community who were asking for it. And I think that's really just so powerful that a community can step forward and say, this is who we are, and we want to honor that. And that's, I personally love visiting Little Saigon, even before it had that title. It's just the best food, the best culture in the world, kind of. And I can't say, I guess, in the world because I represent District 8, but it's just an incredible place. And I think anyone should, go visit Little Saigon. It is really important that we have those spaces. So are you finished, Councilor Peben?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Peben. We're going to go to Councilor Mejia. You have 4 minutes, and then we have no one else left to testify, so then hopefully we can close out the hearing after that. Thank you.
We're going to be here until tomorrow. I'm going to use all my time. I work really hard to get in this seat. All right, so I would love to have a better understanding of I'm going to ask a number of questions here. One is really around the threshold of engagement. How are we holding ourselves accountable and making sure that we are actually listening to the people in our decision-making processes? So would love to know your metrics, how many abutters, how many of them are renters, how many of them are homeowners, how many of them are English speakers, how many of them are non-English speakers, Black, age demo, whatever you have. I'd like to know how we are making sure that we are being thoughtful around our threshold of engagement before we make some decisions. So that's one question. We keep talking about building, and I think that that's part of the conversation, but I'm always curious about existing stock. There are a lot of homes, 2-family homes, and I know the dwelling units is a part of the conversation in terms of housing. But, there are a lot of Victorian homes that exist. And I just think that we have an opportunity to not build ourselves out of this crisis, that we can work with grandma and grandpa and figure out how we make communal housing for folks who are transitioning out of foster care, but they don't have a place to live. What are we doing around being more thoughtful about creating that matchmaking service, right? That is also another pathway towards addressing the housing crisis, because I can point to a number of different elders who are living in a big 2-family, and some of them don't want to rent out the next unit because they're afraid, but they have space to do so. So I think that, as part of the action plan, we should figure out what that existing stock looks like. And if you're already thinking about that, kudos to you all. I'd like to hear what that looks like. And then there is another part of this development conversation, and I know Councilor, I was going to call you Councilor. Let me find out you're going to be running for office. Chief Idowu, we had a hearing last June in regards to construction and the impact that it has on small businesses. And many of those businesses right now are feeling the crunch, and they're still doing construction on Blue Hill Ave. Many are feeling like they're going to lose their business. And so as we're thinking about building the city, I think of Santi's Bakery on Washington Street in Eggleston Square, well, maybe further down Eggleston. It's a little bit further from Eggleston Square, but on Washington Street, Jamaica Plain, if you will. They're building right now right in front of that particular business, and because of that, they're losing business, right? So I would like to hear kind of how the city is grappling with making sure that our small businesses can keep their doors open, and if they're going to assume any type of financial impact. These are folks who can't pay their light bill right now, their electricity. They're having a hard time even paying their rent because of all of the construction that's happening. And so kind of like, what does that look like in terms of within the context of displacement? Because it's not just displacing tenants, we're also talking about displacing small businesses who are trying to stay and keep their doors open. So I'm curious about what you all are thinking about and what protections look like for them. And I did have a question that went unanswered, and it was in regards to the, now that we have funding, I'm curious about what funding is already committed versus pending, like what the ARPA dollars, what's gonna be the game plan there? What are we doing around CPA linkage fees or other new revenue resources? Transfer fees will be used, like how are we grappling with this financial deficit that we're going to see ourselves having to contend with? I'd love to hear that. And I do have other questions, so let's just start with those.
I'm happy to start at the top if that's helpful. Take the question on engagement. So in the approach to engagement in developing the plan, and noting that developing the plan it's a document, but it's a process, and it needs to be an ongoing process of listening. The foundational work we did was really to listen where people are talking, and more importantly, to listen to what people had already said. So over multiple years and through multiple planning processes, constituents had told us what was important to them in relation to displacement. And so the first report we published, we called it the Community Priorities Report, and we analyzed more than 1,400 pages of qualitative feedback that constituents had already shared with us. That could be Mayor's Office of Housing survey, comments provided as part of Blue Hill Avenue engagement, input from East Boston or Olson Brighton planning processes, Squares and Streets comments, Article 80 modernization, really anywhere that people had talked to us about this issue and expressed both the importance of it and shared specific concerns. And we analyzed that. It represented more than 2,300 Bostonians from all corners of the city. That's foundational, right? That's not the end of listening. It's the beginning of listening differently. And so as a complement to that, we are also doing engagement through the Squares and Streets process. We also are working with our colleagues in planning and other departments to hear what they're learning, listening to our colleagues in small business, to hear what they learn from small businesses as an ongoing process. And we have surveys that are out in the field, and the surveys that we're fielding are where we can ask some of the questions, Councilor, that you've identified as being important. What neighborhoods do people live in? Are they renters or homeowners? We have both a survey that's been out in the field, and then we have another one that's out there right now to be continuing to get feedback from folks. And I'm happy to come back when we have all that more recent intel gathered and share some of those statistics with you.
I'd like to add one more demographic in case you don't have it already, but I'd like to know kind of like the income bracket of folks, right? I think that's a key component of understanding who it is that we're talking to, because what I keep learning in my world here is that I'm going to keep going back to low-income people, and there's a privilege that many of us have because we have access to Wi-Fi, we have access to laptops, we have access to smartphones that are not so smart at all times, right? And so all of this information is great that you're able to gather, but not everyone has the tools or the know-how to be able to respond to that. So I just kind of want to continue to push us to think about that deficit.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate that. I'm curious about the construction and the small business.
I've got two I took away two things. Well, one other thing in addition to the impacts. So I start at the bottom first, because you talked about with what's happening in DC, what does that mean for new revenue items? Just wanted to add a little plug that, one thing that the mayor announced at the State of the City was the Business Recruitment Office, which is going to wind up living under my cabinet, and the whole focus is on bringing new companies and business to the area, particularly to fill up the downtown vacancies to add to the tax base. So just to say that that's one effort we're undertaking to add more to the pot here, in addition to all the work that everyone else is thinking about for other revenue items. For construction, I think you're right as a missing element that right now this takes into account, the plan takes into account new development and what impact that will have. But I think there's another AMI that you're talking about, which is the area median impact of projects. You see, quick-witted, and what impact that's going to have on small businesses and residents in the area, right? And I think that is something that we can take as a feedback item for this plan and others.
Because I don't want to be disruptive, but I love that area medium impact. Did you coin that? Because I'm going to be using. I'm going to be saying, Chief Idu said that. But I think it's really important. Like if we're in this moment of like, and Devin, you've been here, you've seen me. Like I just want to solve problems, right? Like I don't want to be difficult, which I am, and I'm okay with that. But that's my job. My job is to ask difficult questions because these are the questions that people ask me out in these streets, and I don't have answers to. So I need to be able to bring them here and then bring them back out into these streets so that people can understand the work that's being done here, right? So I just want everybody to know that is always my posture when I ask questions. And Chief Idu, you saw when you were on the other side of this, I've been consistent with my voice, regardless of what the administration leadership looks like. My job is to show up and ask these questions. And so that's why I mentioned earlier, it's not about the administration, it really is about the context and the content of what we're talking about. So, because now you're on the inside, you're experiencing me very different than when you were on the outskirts of this place, right? So I just want you to know, I still see you and I still respect you and I still value the work that you're doing in here. And I'd love for you all to consider this conversation around the construction and the area medium impact on businesses as your displacement action plan. I think nobody's taking notes. I didn't see nobody write that down. Devin, you better write that down. It's going right there. Because I'm gonna hold you. I want that in this plan. I keep this plan here, the 30,000-page plan. I want it here. I believe that construction and the impact of construction is displacing small businesses, in particular in low-income communities. And I believe that we need to hold ourselves accountable to making sure that we have some relief for those folks. So what can we do?
I will say even that you're hosting the hearing, and the hearing is what I was thinking about too, and I was talking about grants, et cetera, because I remember we were talking about that point at the Bowling Building. And I will say as a residual effect of that conversation, there is now a little bit more of a tighter collaboration between my team and transportation, where even just as an anecdotal reference on outdoor dining, the program that we're managing, that, just this morning I saw a thread about how we're trying to mitigate the impact of, I can't remember what company now, Eversource maybe, doing a project and what impact that's going to have on a couple of businesses on a street who have a fine application to do outdoor dining, but what impact that will be. And it was a whole thing about like, well, okay, we're going to do things this way and, run the lines this way so that we can make sure they can keep their outline, et cetera. So like that wasn't happening before. And now as a result of, the conversation that you and other colleagues hosted, there's a little bit more of a conversation, not just to say as an impact of.
I see. I just want you to know I have an area medium impact too. I do things. But I'm curious, but is there a way to retrograde history? Like, can we do something for
Retroactively?
Yeah,
I mean,
can we do that something for Blue Hill Avenue?
Well, so I don't want to, the only reason I'm going to punt on that particular question is because I know that Alicia and team have been doing a lot of, not just conversation, but talking about like what are specific ways to help specific businesses like Moringuez and others. I don't know off the top of my head where that is right now, but I do know they've been.
I need them to come help me because those businesses are still up in arms and.
Oh, I'm very sure. I mean, I can't, our goal is not to make people happy with what was happening in the past, but rather to think about how do we help them in this particular moment.
I don't want to be happy.
Oh, yeah, well, that's my point, is I know that people are still upset, but our thing is like, we want to be helpful.
Yeah, right? We do. We need
no
to be.
No matter how people are feeling about it, we want to, but that's again, one thing I was talking about. We want to, in addition to all the support in terms of, grants or loans or technical assistance, the goal for me is I want to drive people to these places to support them financially on a regular basis, not just through marketing campaigns, et cetera. I want it to be a destination because that's how we're going to ensure that they're long past we're here,
Yeah. So no one still answered the question about ARPA, how linkage. What are we going to do with that?
So
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful couple of years having a very large additional resource, and I thank Mayor Wu for making it available for housing and small businesses where many cities did not. As you know, we've worked really hard to try to pass transfer fee, which would have been the natural substitute for ARPA. By our estimates, we looking over the last couple of years, we would have got somewhere between $60 and $100 million per year for affordable housing every single year. So it's tragic that it didn't pass. And once again, we weren't able to get something that Boston needed through the legislature. There is another it's not home rule petition, but an enabling piece of legislation that has been filed that we will be supporting. And certainly we can work with the city council to have your voices heard up there as well. But I think there are many cities and towns right now that absolutely need this to pass. And there's a lot of support for it. And there really was a handful at the end that didn't agree. But I think we're going to really make a go of it again.
Yeah, thank you. And I know the buzzer is not going to go off, but I'm going to go off myself. But you didn't say it. But I do, look, at the end of the day, I know, Sheila, your team has been amazing with our office. I mean, there has not been one case that we sent your way that you did not, pick up the call and resolve it, sometimes even at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. I'm working, you're working, your entire team is working for the city. So know that these questions are not a reflection of because the more I know, the better I can advocate for you when it's time for me to ask for that money. I know what to ask for, right?
We're all in this together.
That's right, exactly, and you know that. And the same with you, Chief Edu. Devin, I know we're getting to know, you're on the other side of the situation now. You're part of the family now, but I'm getting used to you. But nah, look, at the end of the day, I just think that if we can really model what it looks like to work collaboratively, I'm your translator. This is what I say to everybody. Whatever y'all are talking about, people ask me, what do they say? What does that mean? I try to make sense of it. Because if I don't understand it, know that other people who rely on us don't understand it either, right? So for me, it's really seeking to understand so that I could better advocate for the things that this moment is requiring. It's not a matter of being difficult. So in the spirit of that, I hope that that's how I'm always embraced, and at least from y'all here. I don't know what my colleagues think about me, but that's okay. I'm still here.
No, I'm so grateful that you're here, Councilor Mejia. And I just want to say I was in Mission Hill, and this woman came up to me and she said in Spanish, "My friend's Julia Mejia." And it was just the sweetest thing ever. And I just think that, we're all here to represent, I know I represent my district, but we're all here to represent everyone. We're all here to make the city better. Displacement is part of that conversation. How we can prevent it, housing is part of that conversation. And I really think that we really did make a dent just in bringing this forward, talking about it in a public way. And I think now that there's this plan, I'm hoping that it gets, I know it's derived from public input, but now I'm hoping it kind of comes back to the community. And I think it's just such a great opportunity for us to have this conversation, to create really just like the roadmap of how we deal with these issues, and also how we have a conversation about trade-offs in every single situation, which we need to do. So I want to thank Councillor Pepin, Councillor Mejia, and Councillor Rorel for bringing this forward. I think we had a really productive conversation. It's one that I would honestly feel interested in continuing if there's sort of some update later in the year. But at this time, I'd like to, the docket on 0311, we are adjourned.
Thank you all.